Vice Chair of the FY24 CA Board of Directors. Andy Stack has asked me to chair tonight's work session tonight. Before we get started, Andy would like to make a few remarks. So, Andy?
Thanks, Eric. First, as you can probably see, I have had a little heart surgery this morning, and I am recovering. And I want to thank Eric for filling in for me so I didn't have to come in person. I wanted to let everyone know that Lynn Egan, our representative from Town Center, has resigned. We're very sorry to see her go. We want to thank Lynn for all the hard work she's done over the past several years, both for CA and Columbia, and we certainly wish her well in the future. With Lynn's resignation, there was an opening now on the audit committee, and I've appointed Reg Avery to take that position, so Reg has agreed. On August 22nd, the chair of the audit committee, Jim Young, and myself met with the CA employees who worked with the independent auditor this past year. And we wanted to thank them for all their hard work, and it was their dedication and effort that helped us get the clean opinion, which was very good news. Just remind everyone that the audit committee meeting is actually on September 26th. All the board members are invited to attend. And then on September 27th, we have the covenants information session, and hopefully you've been able to register. So that's pretty much it. And thank you, Eric, for filling in.
You're welcome. Thank you. Please remember that the work session tonight is being live streamed. You can find the agendas and background materials for this evening on the CA Board of Directors webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those watching this work session there. If you're virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that all cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak, and I'll record the names in the order which I say them. If you're virtual, please raise your hand. Use the hand raise feature. As we move through the work session, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate a motion as well as who motioned and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any board member present, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Sky Anderson. Thank you. I will now call the roll. Sky.
Here.
Reg.
Here.
Karen.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Alan.
Here.
Dennis.
Here.
Keith.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
And I am here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I move.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Keith moved, Reg second. Are there any objections to the agenda? Seeing no objections, the agenda is so moved. We'll now move on to resident speak out. Speakers will be asked to speak in the order which they signed up. Individuals have 3 minutes for comment. Anyone representing a group has 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. We ask the speakers to adhere to the 3-minute time limit when presenting testimony for board members to limit questions in order to stay within the allotted time period. Our first speaker is Bob Dover.
Hi, folks. Tonight I'm giving part one of what I hope will be a 2-part speak out. CA has the ability to undertake projects that range in size from small to enormous. They can be deep within CA property, or they can be directly up against the fence line. They can involve minor modification of topography and vegetation or major modification. What this means is that some small CA projects won't affect adjacent properties, but larger projects may. The bigger they are and the closer they are to adjacent properties, the greater the likelihood that damage could occur to the adjacent properties, exposing CA to liability for damages. I'm not sure that any of you have an idea of the scale of what had been proposed at Elkhorn. You've been told that Elkhorn was just another run-of-the-mill stream restoration project, just like hundreds of others. Everybody does them. This isn't true. The CA staff cited 7 stream restorations funded by Chesapeake Bay organizations. The largest of those was 3,000 feet long. Elkhorn was 33,000. In terms of wetland impacts, Elkhorn would have been among the largest 1% of all permitted wetland projects in the United States. Longfellow was an easement of 13 acres. Elkhorn is 10 times the size of that. The population in the Longfellow census blocks is 1,900 people. The population in the Elkhorn census blocks is 19,000 people. The project was on an enormous scale And the developer chose, for obvious reasons, not to include any of that information in the public documentation or presentations. Hydrology projects like this go wrong and cause unanticipated flooding all the time. I've seen it. When something happens and CA gets sued for damages, it's now documented that you relied for expert advice on community volunteers, none of them trained in hydrology, all of them admitting that they've not conducted a technical review of the documents, and having not followed the administrative requirements of their charter. It's also documented that some board members are trying to shut down residents speak out, and I see on the agenda this will be discussed again tonight. These are exactly the kinds of issues that a future court will look at when considering whether CA was negligent. I'm not threatening, I'm predicting. It's my understanding that CA has already been sued once for its actions in Elkhorn about 10 years ago, so why are you assuming it would never happen again? In my next speak out in a couple weeks, if you let me have one, I'm going to be recommending that you make changes to the WAC charter to make sure that they limit their activities to projects that have no potential to impact adjacent homeowners. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Reg?
Yes. Bob, can you tell me what happens? I don't understand what happens. You talked about runoff and so if we take down a tree, what happens? Does that affect the runoff or anything?
Yeah, I mean, the effect on the runoff depends on how many trees you take down. But trees evapotranspire water out of the watershed. And my experience, and I have a lot of project experience on this, is that when large areas of trees, I've done it sort of both ways. When large areas of trees are planted, they lower the groundwater table and they remove water from the watershed, which stabilizes the runoff in the watershed. Conversely, when trees are cut down, they're no longer evapotranspirating the water. The water table rises and runoff occurs and flooding occurs. And I've stood there and watched it on a wind farm in West Virginia. They cut down like 20 acres of trees and the mountain sprung leaks. The developer ended up buying several houses that were flooded out because of that. So cutting down trees causes flooding to happen. And, well, that answers your question.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
Next, we have Tina Horn.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. My name is Tina Horn, and I am speaking in my official capacity as Vice Chair of the Wild Lake Village Board. I'm here to talk about CA's budget priorities for this coming fiscal year. Among other priorities, we are here to speak out in support of funding for the Community Foundation of Howard County. As you are aware, our community thrives on collaboration and shared responsibility, and the CA's contributions would significantly impact the welfare of the residents of our beloved Columbia. Community Foundation of Howard County has consistently demonstrated its dedication to the betterment of our community. They have played a pivotal English, not my thing, I apologize. They have played a pivotal role in various initiatives that have enhanced the quality of life for our residents. These initiatives include educational programs, environmental conservation efforts, cultural events, and countless others that contribute to the well-being of our community members. The Community Foundation has a demonstrated history of rigorous, transparent, criteria-based grant-making with processes and procedures every step of the way. This will represent a significant improvement in the investment of charitable funds through the Columbia Association. However, to continue their valuable work and expand their reach, the foundation requires financial support. By offering funding, the Columbia Association would not only reinforce its commitment to the communities within Columbia, but also empower the foundation to tackle more ambitious projects that will benefit our residents even further. Your financial support in this upcoming budget would be a testament to your dedication to the betterment of Columbia and its residents. We are confident that your involvement will have a lasting positive impact. Further, we wish to be very clear with this board that our CA representative has presented budgetary priorities, and the village board is firmly in support of his proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you. That concludes resident speak out for this evening. To limit interruptions during board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay as an attendee and watch the remainder of the work session. You can also watch a live stream of the CA live stream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. I will now take a moment to allow our staff to make this transition. Thank you. The first item on our work session topic is 4A, the easement request from Howard Hughes Corporation regarding the jug handle. So I believe there's a presentation associated with this.
That's my computer. Can you switch those two?
Is Greg, is your team there?
Greg's here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Do we need to talk into the mic? My name is Kathy Phillips. I'm Senior Director of Construction with Howard Hughes Corporation. We're here to talk about the Symphony Woods Road and Route 29, excuse me, Broken Land Parkway Interchange Project, also referred to as the Jug Handle. This is a continuation of the Downtown Columbia Master Plan, and the project includes the enhancement of the existing interchange at Broken Land Parkway and Route 29, which will be completed in 3 phases. I hope that's visible for everyone. The first phase, which is shown in lime green, is phase 1, now under construction, is a northbound off-ramp from Route 29 that will take people directly into the Meriwether District. As it currently exists, all traffic from Route 29 is funneled onto Broken Land Parkway toward Hickory Ridge. The second phase, shown in blue, is to extend the Symphony Woods Road to Broken Land Parkway. This phase requires an easement for the State Highway Administration for the slope needed to support the roadway. The third phase, shown in red, sorry, my notes were off, will be a new intersection at Broken Land Parkway and a new ramp to southbound Route 29. I'll turn it over to Joytika from Soltez, who's our civil engineer, and she can talk through the details.
Hi, I'm Jyotika Sharma with Soltis, civil engineer on this project. Just to elaborate on what it entails in various phases and during construction. As you can see on the screen, the green is what we call ramp D spur, and that includes a jug handle connection from Route 29 to Symphony Wood Road. It has stormwater management facilities, some retaining walls to support the ramp, and associated infrastructure like streetlights and a traffic light on Symphony Wood intersection with Meriwether Drive. Then we have the phase 2, which is in blue in this, and that's what Kathy mentioned, needs an easement from Columbia Association, which is shown in yellow, the easement area. This phase 2 has a bridge that will be constructed as part of the extension and some swim facilities. All the improvements, whether it is stormwater management, bridge, road extension, or other supporting infrastructure, is within state highway right-of-way. The yellow part, that's the easement area, about 0.306 acres requested, is only needed to grade and support the grades adjacent grades to the road. So there are no structures or any other kind of utility added into that easement area. And then the final phase is the red phase, which is a further extension and construction of a ramp. There will be a traffic signal construction associated with that, and again, utility, stormwater management, streetlights, and things that support the roadway network for this entire project as well. The entire project has been approved by State Highway. This phasing is only for construction. So, as we mentioned before, phase 1 is under construction, and phase 2 and phase 3 will follow through. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Any further slides?
Oh, there's a blow up of the
Yeah.
area.
Thank you. Yes, I can just explain a little bit more on this yellow area. As you can see, it's only the grade tie-up that is required. There is a floodplain that exists currently on this lot, which we are not impacting. There are no impacts to the floodplain due to our project. We are only tying grades very closely in that floodplain area. There is no drainage pattern that has been impacted also. All the stormwater management for this project is being provided within State Highway right-of-way and will be maintained by State Highway Administration as well. There is a culvert which actually connects and collects the water from the east to west and discharges on this lot, which is owned by Columbia Association. That is also not being impacted. So there are very minimal impacts for this yellow area where the easement has been requested.
Thanks. I think you've got one last slide after this.
This is just an aerial view that shows the easement area clouded in red. As you can see, this Merriweather District in the foreground. You can see Route 29 in the top left corner.
Thanks.
Just to add to that, so as you can see, there is no tree removal that is associated with this grading at this point. All of that was, I think, taken care of in a previous permit. And even with this grading, there's not going to be any impacts to the vegetation. And then the ground cover and any landscaping in this area will be provided per the approved state highway plans.
Okay. Could you close out the slides so I can see the participants?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was asking IT to close out the slideshow so I can see the participants.
You have the mouse, right? Yeah, just stop sharing.
Stop sharing. Thanks. Do we have any questions? Sky.
I do.
Me?
You, Scott.
Sky. Sky Redden and Allen.
I have, I think, two questions. First of all, could you define easement for the residents who don't understand that term? And secondly, if the easement is granted, it's permanent, that's my understanding, and that land could not be used for anything else in the future, is that correct?
So this is a rewardable grading easement with State Highway. So after the land has been graded, and because of the steep slopes, I think it can be rewarded back to CA. It's just for the grading purposes. But the existing slopes are pretty significant there. And with the floodplain in that area, we do not anticipate that land for any kind of improvements other than supporting probably adjacent infrastructure.
Reg.
What happens if we said, no, we do not want to give this up as an easement? What happens from there? what do you do? Is there a plan B?
There is no plan B, but as we said, this is like, at this point, the plan has been approved with State Highway. Then Howard Hughes has to go back and make an application and add a significant cost to the project by probably trying to put a retaining wall to make those grades. And then we do not know yet what will be the impact of that, because it could reduce the right-of-way as well as to install that retaining wall within that section of the road. It could, reduce the right-of-way of the road, and then it could impact the overall cross-section of the road as well.
But it'd be no impact, financial impact to CA if we said no, and you guys had to go back and replan.
An answer for that?
Sure.
Yeah, here.
Good evening, Greg Fitchett with Howard Hughes. So this is a state-funded project.
Yep.
So the state has, again, as Jatika said, state's approved the plans for this project. This is funded by the state. If there would be an added cost, it would be an added cost to the state. There really is no plan B. One thing I might point out is that this is land that that Howard Hughes deeded to the Columbia Association as part of the overall open space provisions all around the Meriwether District a few years ago. So this was, we didn't reserve back all the easements that we thought we would need, because obviously we have a great cooperative relationship with CA. So, but this is land that was originally HRD's land that we provided to the Columbia Association to provide more open space for the community. And then but we do need this easement back, or actually the State Highway needs this easement back in order to complete this project, which was part of the original downtown.
So I'm not asking you, say give it back, take back whatever you want to do. I'm asking what it will happen if we said no. I just want to understand. Simple as that.
There would be a significant additional cost of the project, which we would have to go back to the state to pay for.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Alan? Alan and Karen. Alan?
Yeah, I thank you to Sky and Reg for asking two of my questions. Is this an easement with, and I should know this, but I'm not with my regular computer, is this an easement with the state or with Howard Hughes?
With the state.
Who's asking for this easement?
It's with the State Highway.
Okay. Thank you. Second question. You've all done a great job of telling us what impact this won't have. I guess maybe this is more to Dennis than anybody else. What impact will this have? What is it that we might be able to do that we couldn't do if we give this easement? What is it that we won't be able to do that we used to be able to do if we give this easement?
I can't imagine a use we'd have for that piece of property that close to an exit ramp. I'm not sure. I can't imagine. There might be something that we couldn't do, but I can't imagine at this time what that might be. It was graded before we took possession of it, so the trees were taken down in advance of CA taking possession of the property. So it's not as if we're taking trees down to get this done. It does take away some of our land rights because we're limited in what we can do, but I'm not sure in that specific area next to that ramp what we might do.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. One last comment. I guess I just have to share, and I forgot the name of the person who's just spoke a moment ago. I guess I'm not sure of the relevance of that. This used to be Howard Hughes land, and it was deeded to CA. It's CA's land now. Thank you.
Okay, Karen.
Yeah, I heard multiple times that there's no impacts. Do we have the documentation? Is that available somewhere for us to see? Kept saying that it's next to a floodplain, but there's no impact to the floodplain. I just know that south entrance road is notorious for flooding. So I would like to see any documentation that shows that there's not going to be any impacts to that. And then, I guess overall, what is the value of this road? If Howard Hughes doesn't get this road, what is the value? And what is the value to Howard Hughes? But more importantly, what is the value to the Columbia Association? Like, how is this road going to serve the residents of Columbia? How is it going to make it as a social welfare organization? What does this give the residents of Columbia?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. And again, Alan, it was Greg Fitchett that was speaking before. But the value to the overall Columbia community is, I mean, this is part of the original Downtown Columbia Plan, which was passed back in 2010. And this provides a tremendous amount of value. It does to us, and it also provides a lot of value to all of sort of, I would say, all of West Columbia, and really all of Columbia, because right now, all traffic that's going northbound on 29 and wants to enter into Columbia goes on one off-ramp. It all goes on to Broken Land, whether you are going to the mall, whether you're going to Meriwether Post Pavilion, or whether you're going to the hospital, or whether you're going to the community college, or whether you're going to the villages in Hickory Ridge or Harper's Choice. Everybody gets funneled on to Broken Land Parkway. This, and this is, I'm just speaking of the first phase here. This will allow people who are going either to Meriwether Post Pavilion or the Meriwether District or to the mall to separate that traffic out from the traffic that's going to the hospital or the community college or the other neighborhoods in West Columbia. So I think that's the biggest immediate value that's provided, is it will provide much better access for people who are trying to get to those destinations, either whether it's the ones that are in downtown Columbia or the ones that are in other parts of the community, again, the hospital, the community college, or those neighborhoods, better access for all those folks. The second phases and the third phase, that will provide, again, better sort of in and out access from downtown Columbia and the other parts of West Columbia that use this interchange. So obviously it's a regional benefit, which is why the state is funding the project, and again is why it was part of the original Downtown Columbia plan passed in 2010.
And to my first question, is there documentation about the impacts that this work is going to have? Is there something we can see rather than just a verbal assurance that there's no impacts to the floodplain, things like that?
So the plan was reviewed in greater detail by State Highway, and we can definitely provide a blow-up of that area so that you can see that the existing grades and the proposed grades are pretty close, and how much, fill is going to be, minimal fill is going to be in that area. And so this project went through a 30%, 60%, and then 100% review cycles with State Highway. And at that time, there was a detailed review by State Highway hydraulic division to understand any impacts of this project on the adjoining or any current environmental features, including any floodplain or any streams. And none were found, just because this project in its entirety provides stormwater management control and quality improvement. But yes,
So you're saying that, so can I conclude from that you're saying that it is going to improve the situation?
For the easement area, there's not going to be any change. Yes, if that's what you're asking. But yes, overall, the project meets the state requirements for water quality and quantity control for stormwater.
Chris?
Thanks. Yep, just getting off mute. So just so that I kind of understand, so the easement, the first easement that you showed, or the easement that's in question, that's all that's going to happen to that land is going to be grading, right? You're taking it from, 1% to a 3% or whatever the numbers are. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Nothing is being built on that land, right?
That's right.
Okay. So it's a grading, and Karen, thank you for asking my question. That was the only other thing is, just given that the Little Patuxent is right there, that there's a floodplain, just having that grading and we're adding impervious surface to that, I would also love to see kind of the hydrology reports and exactly what the impact is going to be, because it's, it may be small, but I can't believe it's nothing. So would love to see that. and I don't kind of understand, and I'm not sure who this question is for, but a revertible easement that I'm seeing on the easement request form, is there a timeline that's associated with that for when that easement reverts back to Columbia Association?
We are still finalizing that document with State Highway, so I do not have that information at this point.
Can you give me a ballpark?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
I don't think we can speak for State.
Yes. No, we don't know that yet because State Highway will finalize that document for us.
Okay, but it's just a so essentially if we grant the easement, it gets graded to allow you to build adjacent to it this jug handle, and then it reverts back to Columbia Association within the near future, not 30 years from now, but at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think the only thing is that I would like to see some assurance. Just there's a lot of concern right now about floodplains, about how we're managing water. So getting that documentation and being able to have that to show to residents. Has there been any kind of an input session or feedback from businesses and people that live in the Merriweather district?
There has been a lot of discussion of this project and generally the Downtown Columbia Plan over the years. This project specifically was addressed, I don't know, it was during the COVID years, so it was kind of in that haze, but there was a lot of discussion about this. This project was included in the county's priority letter, which is done every year. The county lists their transportation priorities to the state in request for funds. That was listed, and there was quite a bit of discussion about this project, and specifically, I believe that was in 2021. So, but again, this is not a new project. This is a project that has been on the books, for over a decade at this point.
Sure, understood. But that's without constant reminders, people forget, and then when you start actually breaking ground, it's like, whoa, hold on, what's going on? So those are kind of like the hot topics I want to make sure that we're addressing are water management and ensuring that there's public feedback and that there's a good communication plan with the people in the community so that they're aware of what's happening and not, broadsided with it. That's all.
And just to be clear also, I mean, the first phase of this project is under construction now. So, and while this is, there is a separate phasing to this project, this is for the second phase of the project from a resident perspective or from from a public perception perspective, there really won't be any difference between the first phase and the second phase. It's all in the same area. It's all associated with the same scope of work.
That's correct.
Understood. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Chris, I just wanted to add one more thing, that there is no impervious added onto this easement area. So the ground cover right now existing and proposed is going to be the same.
No, I understand. You're right. My concern regarding water management is probably going to be more, the larger impact would be from the impervious surfaces being added by the actual, asphalt of the jug handle, which is a different project and is not relevant to this particular easement. So thank you for the clarification.
Thanks. Bill?
Yep. Hi. Good evening. I was wondering, as part of this grading that is proposed, will any soil from the subject site be removed?
I will have to check the grades more closely. I think it is more of a small fill.
Okay, so some may be added. That's the intent. Okay, that helps. I appreciate that. And just a quick comment for my fellow board members: if this does not get approved and there is a delay involved, we'll be looking at less efficient movement of traffic through downtown, which means that values of properties will lag, and we will see less income, less revenue from the downtown area than if this proceeds according with what the state plan is. And that's important to consider as part of the evaluation here, is that this will actually hit our bottom line in some way if not approved. So just something to consider.
Reg?
So since I've been on the board, one of my neighbors Bob Dover in the back there keeps talking about hydraulics, and so I've learned to ask about that, but several members have already asked. So I have another question regarding easements, and I caught something you said, and maybe it slipped the tongue, but are there additional easements coming down the road that you're going to present us with? Is there anything else that you're going to come to and say, hey, we need an easement for this project or any other project coming up here soon?
Not with this project.
I'm not aware of any with this project. I mean, I'm sure, as time, over time, there will be. Certainly, we are beginning development in the lakefront. The lakefront redevelopment is, it's underway now with the medical office building, 10285 Lakefront. There were some easements associated with that project. There were easements associated with the Lakefront North project, which the board granted, which, that project is now approved, and we're finalizing construction documents there. There's the library project, which we're working with the county and the library system on. I'm sure there would be, again, because it's adjacent to CA property, I'm sure there would be easements that would be associated with that project. Essentially, whenever we, because the land between, Columbia Association and HRD and other properties throughout Columbia, there's a lot of, overlap and adjacency that requires easements from time to time. I've been here 10 years now. I think, during that time, I'm sure I've been in front of the CA board or my colleagues have been in front of the CA board probably at least 5 or 6 times for easements associated with projects. I think it's fairly common and consistent practice. We grant easements to the Columbia Association as well. We have a lot of property, HRD has a lot of property throughout Columbia. I know just recently there was, I don't know if it was a license agreement or an easement, but related to the RV park in Gateway that we granted to the Columbia Association. It's just because all of us are sort of an outgrowth of the Rouse Company, and the Rouse Company originally owned almost all of the land throughout Columbia. There's always these kind of sort of adjacency issues that just need to be.
Yeah, so I understand. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do understand all that. So I'm just trying to get an idea of do we have any more easements coming up? Because I was just myself thinking, wow, how much land is left for CA and for you and for everybody else? I'm just trying to get a quick picture.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know of any immediate. I don't think there's any associated with this project that we're aware of right now. In the lakefront, I would say with the library, I would expect there would be projects or easements related there. And in the future, I don't know, but I would expect there would be.
Thanks. I actually have a couple questions, and they're actually more for Dennis. First question is, what is the one-time fee?
It's about $4,500.
$4,500?
Yep.
And the second question I have for you is, so you mentioned that this third of an acre doesn't really have much use, especially after we put in the jug handle for CA. The question I have is, could this be sold? Could this be sold to either SHA or Howard Hughes so that it goes along with the rest of the highway?
It would be up to the board, but we generally don't sell property. We generally give easements or license agreements, but CA generally doesn't sell property.
Because one concern I have is we're going to be left maintaining a third of an acre that's sort of will be more of like an island in time that we'd be forced to maintain.
It would be up to the board, but I would generally not in favor of giving a property.
Okay. If there's no further questions,
looks like Alan and Karen have questions.
Oh, Karen's got a question?
There's
Sorry.
2 questions from the audience.
Oh, yeah. Karen and Alan.
Alan,
Sorry.
I think Alan had his hand up before me.
But you're talking, so I'll go with Karen first.
Okay. Bill, you made some statements. So my question is for Bill. Bill, you made some statements about our loss of income if we don't approve this. Do we have, again, I'm going to ask for documentation. Do we have documentation showing the revenue that's expected from these projects? I mean, I wasn't quite sure what you were talking about when you said loss of property values. I don't see our property values going down for any reason in the near future, but what are you basing your statements on? I need a little more understanding about what you were talking about.
Karen, I think we can follow up this more when we get to our regular meeting and discuss this at the end, but just briefly, I was not talking about losing property value. I was saying that the increase would not be as immediate as if there's a delay in this infrastructure project, the increase in property values would not be as immediate if this is delayed. More because the traffic situation would remain static and more than likely over time would become slightly worse. This is a state highway project. There's no direct property value associated with it, but the mere access that it provides would then have knock-on effects that would allow more development to occur, such as the Lakefront North that could proceed in time. And also, if you live in an area where the traffic doesn't move every day, the value of that property is going to be less than if you have free-flowing traffic, which is what the point of this interchange would be. So it's not a diminishment of property value. It's a delay in the increase in the property value. And we would not be able to realize that, or if that property value is not realized, we would not gain in our revenue based on the assessments that are given to every residential and commercial property in Columbia. Is that a little better?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, all right. Look forward to the talk later this month.
Okay, Andy, then Alan. Andy.
Yeah, I was thinking that two of the things that appeal to me about this project is one is the reduction of the traffic on Broken Land Parkway. For any of you who have been caught in the Merriweather traffic and you see it backed up all around Hickory Ridge Road, down the Broken Land Parkway, it would be nice that they'll have virtually a direct access into the Merriweather parking garage and we won't have to face all that traffic on Broken Land Parkway and Hickory Ridge Road. The second thing I think, which is valuable from this, which hasn't been discussed tonight, is that there's a fire station at the parking garage, and this connecting to Broken Land Parkway will reduce response times from the fire department because they will now have a much better, a much faster access to both north and southbound 29 as well as Broken Land Parkway. And I think that's a benefit we need to think about too, that reducing the time it takes the fire department to get out to situations is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, a question and then two comments, or comments and a request. My question is, you talked about reverting back to CA. You've done the grading. Easement's reverted back to CA. Does this easement give State Highway future rights? I mean, if they need to maintain something where they have to come back to us to say, hey, we need an easement on your property again?
Alan,
don't all speak at once.
Sorry. At this point, State Highway is only looking this for revertible easement only for grading. And then we are still finalizing, State Highway is still finalizing this easement document. Once we have that, we will review it, and of course Howard Hughes will have it, and probably we can look into it in greater detail. But at this point, this is a revertible easement only for grading.
And State Highway would not have any rights to come back on our property later if they realized they needed to touch up the grading, or a storm happened and the grading washed away and they needed to do something to it. They'd have to come back to us. Is that correct?
Again, we don't know what's going to go in the easement document at this point.
I thought that's what we're approving or talking about approving tonight. I'm confused then. Please say more.
Details about how long, this easement is going to last, or, if there will be a maintenance easement, maintenance easement associated with that has not been mentioned by State Highway. My understanding is that this is only for grading.
Will we have that information before we have to vote on this?
We expect that document to be ready in 2 to 3 weeks.
If this is approved tonight.
Yes.
Well,
2 weeks is our voting time, I assume, on this.
So just
or are we not going to vote on this till October?
Yeah, so point of information, we don't actually vote tonight, so this comes up for a vote in 2 weeks. So we would need,
That's what I'm
we would
saying.
potentially need that information within the next week or so that it could influence a vote in 2 weeks. So there's not going to be any voting tonight on this.
I know we're not voting tonight, but that was my point. My request, Greg, you mentioned the library project. I know that's not what we're talking about tonight, but as you recall, when the library project was first, I'll use the polite term, unveiled. Some would use other words for it.
Is this relevant to the current easement? Alan, is this relevant to the current easement request?
I'm making a request that in the future that we have an update on the current status of that library project at some point coming from Howard Hughes. My last comment to you, Greg, and Greg, thank you for, I didn't realize it was you in the audience. I can't see your face. All I see is the back of your head. When you made your comment, I want to be just real clear. When you made your comment that used to be Howard Hughes land, the story that raised in me was when Howard Hughes gives Grant CA land, deeds it over, that Howard Hughes expects to have continued control over it. And that story didn't sit well with me.
Okay. I do have one final question, seeing no one else has any questions. And the question I have is, if there's some kind of issue with the grading in the future, say storm washes it out and it needs to be regraded, who is responsible for that regrading? Will it be CA because we still own it? Will it be SHA? Will it be Howard Hughes? Who would be responsible if it needs to be regraded in the future for whatever reason? Say there's a mudslide or something.
I think as long as, thank you. I think as long as the easement is in place with State Highway, it would be a State Highway responsibility.
So it'd be an SHA responsibility before it reverts, and then after it reverts to us in X number of years, whose responsibility would it be to regrade it if something happened X number of years from now?
I think that's a very good question, and I think that, some of these questions, again, I wasn't aware that it wasn't voting tonight. I think some of these questions we can answer within the next, we can answer before you actually vote in 2 weeks, so I think.
Additional State Highway information.
Yes.
No, that's fine. That'd be great if you can put together a list of questions and answers. That'd be great. Thanks. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the 4B, the FY25 budget discussion, focusing on strategic priorities. So Dennis, would you like to introduce this topic?
We'll turn it over to Susan.
Or Susan, would you like to introduce the topic?
Yeah, well, good evening and thank you for the opportunity that you have before you, really, to influence FY25 budget and at hopefully a high level kind of strategic priority level. Frequently, I would be asked in prior budget cycles how the board's strategic plan was factored into what staff presented in the draft budget. And often I think the board didn't feel like they had opportunity to have a strategic or, priority discussion. So that's what this opportunity is tonight. We would ask, as you know, the schedule's been determined and approved by the board a couple months ago. So we'd be looking at the end of September at your next meeting for some guidance that you would actually vote on for those priorities. And just as an example, in the past, there's been a focus on environmental sustainability as a core value, having CA facilities and programs that currently exist continue to emphasize or to further support accessibility, focused on pricing and free programming and things like that. So that's what we'd be looking for, hearing from you over the next two meetings. And we did run a community survey. That information's been summarized, and I think that's about it. So I'll just turn it over to you guys for that discussion.
Thank you. So basically what I've heard some example priorities that we could consider basically the environment, programming, and financial accessibility, or any kind of accessibility for that matter. So the way I think I'm going to try to approach this is I'd like to just go around, and if people want to list one or two priorities, and we'll basically assemble a list, and then we can try to discuss where we would try to slot them. So I'll go around this way if that's okay. So I'll start with this guy.
First of all, I think there's some misunderstanding or miscommunication. We're talking about the wish list from CA. My village manager took it upon herself to take charge of this project for our village, and I was unable to get the final list from her. I also somehow, because this is my first year, assumed that all the villages would be sending their wish list to a central person in CA who would then compile them and we would discuss them. So I think I could probably find 4 of the wishes on the list if I went through some of this.
We can come back to you if you want.
Okay, thanks.
Susan. Susan?
So I would just clarify that this is the time for strategic discussion and not necessarily specific projects from villages, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to keep it at a high level, but I do want to try to capture the strategic priorities. So I think we've got 3 good ones to start off with: environment, programming, accessibility.
And they were just examples.
They're just examples, but I think they're good examples. But I want to try to see if there's any other examples that the board might come up with. So I'll just go around the room. Reg, do you have?
So actually, I was confused because I thought we were going at the strategic level. So when you start talking about individual, that threw me off, and I'm busy trying to find what my village was what we were talking about. But I think it's a great idea to go to the strategic level, see what we're really interested in as an organization, as a business. And I think some of the things that we've already presented here are pretty much what we're really looking for as a business. Continue on with the vision and goals of Columbia Association, making sure that we are meeting those goals. I think that's important to us. I think also important to us is to make sure that we continue the value of being living as residents in Columbia, and far as what does our community look like, far as keeping our structure, our building structures up to date and appropriately ready for business. And that, what I mean by that is, we don't want buildings that are falling apart, but we have some buildings that are very old and need to be renovated. So we need to invest in that. We need to make sure that we're investing in our community, in the environmental aspect of our community, making sure that, matter of fact, when I first moved here, one of the things that impressed me was that this was a very green place, a lot of trees, and I want to make sure that we still have those trees and the water and the pathways. Those are important things that speak clearly what Rouse and Company said they were going to provide. So there's just kind of the 50,000 foot level. That's what I think.
So basically, what I'm hearing is things like permanent facilities,
structures. Yeah, our structures and how we
maintaining them.
Yeah, we want to make sure that our residents, they feel like this is they made an investment here. They want to continue seeing this as an investment, a positive investment, something that's going to grow and not fall apart.
I'll go onto the board. Karen?
Yeah, so I think I've talked about this with some of the other board members. I haven't had a chance to talk to every single one, but for me, what I'm really looking for is things like that we've talked about. Eric and Keith and I had a discussion is, for instance, the pools. I think the pools are a high priority. I think the folks in Talbot Springs, Dasher Green, and I was Longfellow, the third pool that closed early. I would like to make sure that our pools, that the directive from a strategic level is that our pools are accessible and affordable. I think we've also talked about the fact that only 25, I believe it was 25% of our residents are joining our facilities. How do we increase membership in our facilities, in our programs from our residents? How do we increase that so that more and more residents are using the things that we have on offer? I would like to see us budget that. To get into a more specific mode, though, like, I'm really concerned. I think that we have, now that WSSI is behind us, we have a really good watershed management plan. Are we following that plan? Are we funding that plan? I would like to make sure that those types of things, like for whatever John McCoy has to do for in the year for this, the following year for this budget, does he have enough money to do all the things he has to do? I don't want to see somebody having to scrape and beg to get money for things that are critically important to the infrastructure that Reg was just talking about. So on a strategic level, those are the things that I'm really thinking about. Also, I would really like us to, I'd like to see us be recruiting more bilingual associates at Columbia Association. I don't know if that's strategic or tactical, because I feel like the Talbot Springs pool could use some bilingual lifeguards. So I would like to see us have some sort of initiative to make sure that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it also includes who's our staff for lifeguards. Where are we recruiting from? Are we bringing everybody in as a potential employee? Because I think lifeguarding, I mean, I know that it's a personal experience, but I thought lifeguarding was a really good job. I think it offers you management experience, customer experience. You have to deal with customers while you're in your bathing suit. Nothing greater than that for management experience. So I think it's a great job, and I'd like us to do more around that in order to keep our pools affordable and accessible. And I'm going to put a wish list item out there. Climate change is here, and we have just experienced our hottest July ever. It's not going to get any cooler. And if we can see our way forward to making our pools free to our residents for the month of July, I would love to see if we could make that a priority. But maybe that's too big of a wish. I don't know.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, a couple of things. I like everything I've heard so far, and picking up on some of that and adding some things. One thing, and I don't necessarily need an answer right this minute in terms of dollars, but in the past we've tried to have a discussion about sort of what does it cost to just keep CA running, and then what do we have as sort of discretionary. And I know that's not necessarily the best way to look at it, but there are some things that we just need to do. And so I want to make sure, I'd like the staff to be able at some point to give us the reality check as we think about these quote unquote wish lists of really what are we really talking about in terms of the quantity we have. Picking up on what Karen was just talking about, I'd like us to really take a look at learning from recent history, whether it's around climate change, whether it's around lifeguard shortage, whatever it is, and think about what do we need to invest in to do what we need to do to meet the challenges. And there's probably lots of other specifics that could go into that. The general area of community engagement has been I know we do surveys, and that's great. In the relatively recent past, but several years ago, we did one or more big events where we invited the community in, and we called it Columbia Talk CA Lessons. I'd like us to be doing more of that kind of thing. But ultimately, with the idea of increasing, we have a part of our strategic plan around this, to figure out different ways to increase diverse participation, not just as clients of our facilities, but really in Columbia and CA, so that we increase, that leads hopefully to diverse leadership. at all levels, within CA, within the board, within Columbia, within villages, et cetera. So I'd like us to be investing in what could we do differently to really create that more diverse participation. And picking up, I think it was something Reg said, back when Milton was president, I thought we had, and maybe we still do, and it's just going on, and I just don't hear about it much. We had an infrastructure plan on what buildings need to be renovated, and we would talk about that. And I don't know that I have a sense of where we are with that. How did the pandemic derail that totally? So what do we need to do? Because that really is the strategic investment in our facilities is that infrastructure plan. That's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, do you have anything?
Yes, sir. So, I mean, I think that the things that have already been mentioned are probably the top ones, right? Environmental, maintaining pathways, and not only maintaining what we have, but also improving, like with the solar panels and the new HVAC systems that we're making more energy efficient or more use of the energy that we're using. So I'm going to stay away from those, and I'm going to say engagement. We got 273 responses on this phase 1 survey out of 105,000 people that live in Columbia, which is 0.0027% of the people. And I just feel like Columbia Association, we live in a very special place, and I feel like a lot of people don't know, right? There's a lot of the original Columbians have, are moved on, and you have new people coming in that don't know the story, don't have the vibe of what Columbia is, what it means, what the people are, what Columbia Association is, and how much Columbia Association does for this area. So I would love to see more engagement, more presence of Columbia Association, getting back into the lakefront, right? Whether it be in the new library or whether it be some standalone, moving a headquarters or at least a satellite office there so that there's more access. Engaging with new residents, people who have moved here, to make sure or give them the opportunity to learn more about where we are, what the history of this place is, and what it means, to help them better connect and understand why Columbia is what it is, because it's a unique place. So that's kind of one of the things that I'd like to see, is to get more buy-in of residents through education and making them aware of what Columbia Association is and what Columbia means.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, I would say my two probably top projects, priorities right at the moment. I'd characterizing them as, one, adapting to change, mostly environment, but other things too, because as some of the speakers have said, things are changing, and so we need to adapt to the changes. And then the second is, and I'll go along with Reg and Alan, is maintaining our existing assets. The community over decades has put a lot of time and effort into our assets, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that they are maintained. So I think those are my two, I'll say, top priorities right now. Thanks.
Thanks. Keith? Most of my commentary is around plans, I guess, and making sure, it was already brought up about facilities, maintenance, and upgrades, and my desire is to know not necessarily the details of the plan, but what does the plan look like, and are we fully funding the plan, so that we're not necessarily falling behind. So I'm just going to go through and list a couple of areas. I know we're working on tot lot design, and I want to make sure that we are on track with our plan. The same thing with pool upgrades and refreshes, is understanding what is the plan and the cycle for those things, and then, are we on track or not on track for that? And again, pathways in the same area. The other piece that I was really curious about is,
it was discussed before, but understanding the watershed advisory plan and what that really means in terms of funding, whatever dollars are needed to be associated with that plan. Technology, I've heard a lot of commentary about the usability of technology, whether it be from pool staff attempting to schedule, or it's individuals wanting to connect in with CA through utilization of coming up here and being able to pay something, or online, and making sure that there's a technology refresh plan that gets us, pretty far down that road. And I think those are the big things for me, is wanting to make sure that there are plans in place, and are the plans being funded? Because when we get down to the level of, and I'm hoping to stay away from this year, but when we get down to the level of, for instance, me saying, hey, I want the King's Contrivance McGill's pool to have XYZ or something along those lines, I prefer to understand where the McGill's pool fits within a plan, and that the plan is on track and being funded. So that's what I would be looking for from a support standpoint, is, are there plans? Are they on track, and are they fully funded before we start looking at putting dollars to other places outside of CA? Thank you. Bill?
Okay, hi. Few things. First, I think that a lot of the discussion about the physical condition of the buildings and the infrastructure is largely a communications concern. I know that we've replaced lots of pathways in Owen Brown. They're replacing pathways in Wild Lake, and they're on a schedule to get that done. We just need to communicate that to the board members. In addition to that, I know that the facilities, the buildings that the villages use are regularly reviewed and updated. We recently went through an audit in Wild Lake, and recommendations were made for making improvements there. So we just need to get that schedule out to everybody. As far as initiatives, I want to bring it back to the grants discussion that my fellow Wild Lake Village Board member brought up at the start of our meeting. I believe the grants portion of our budget is one of the last things to be brought back since COVID. And I think that the relationship we had with the Community Foundation of Howard County was very beneficial for all parties. It not only was money spent here, but it changed lives. And I think it's time that we get back into that mode again to help change the lives of people in Columbia. I particularly would like to carve out the downtown performing arts portion of the grant program and make that a separate discussion. And that would involve the Ann Arbor Trust, the Columbia Festival of the Arts, the Downtown Columbia Partnership, and other members that do downtown performances. I think we should treat that in a different way than we do the nonprofit section with the Community Foundation. I think that we need to do 2, 3, or 4 major rollouts of policy discussions in the coming fiscal year. There are a few things that, although this is a great city, there are things that are lacking and need to be addressed. And I'm just going to go through them really quickly. First was that we don't have any real news organization in this city. And I think for a city of 100,000, that's an oddity. And I think CA should not be in the business of building a newspaper, but we should be doing the good research to provide the people who would make those decisions the data they need as far as what other communities of similar size have newspapers, how bad is this, what models are used for creating a news organization, how we can help, how we cannot help. Somebody needs to start this discussion because it's just not happening from anybody else. And if we're going to be the stewards of this city, it's an important discussion to have. A second initiative, I'm just throwing these out here, the initiative is the strategic part, is most of our streets here in Columbia are named after authors that are of European descent, and most of them are male. And I'm thinking that we should be building an alternative street name list of minority members or emerging plurality members, African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latin American authors for alternative street names if people want to rename their streets, because it seems to be a pretty monolithic name base that we have, and I think that people would take a lot more pride in their streets if there was a little bit more diversity in that. It's got to take money to do that, and it's really a fairly straightforward process. I've done it myself, or I've actually made decisions on that myself. Let's see, a couple of things on the pool fronts. I think we need to be a little bit more inventive. We need to reinvent how we address the pool situation. I know that we looked at making pools free a couple of years ago, and the results of that were pretty dramatic. We pretty much have to shut down everything else in Columbia in order to feed the ability to run the pools for free. I believe that's the short answer on pools. But I think that we ought to look at something like maybe transferring one of the pools to Howard County Rec and Parks and allowing them to give a go at it. If we have pools that are not being effectively utilized and we can't seem to drive people there, I think it would be a great idea to recognize somebody who could do that and give them the chance to do it. It's not a done deal, but I think it's a worthy discussion to think outside the box and say, how do we get people to enjoy pools during the summer? So that's a thought there. And last one or two things here. A fellow Wild Lake resident told me last month as I was out talking, data is the new infrastructure. And I thought that was great, and I told him I was going to steal it. But I think as far as membership, attendance at facilities, usage of things like the PATH system or tot lots or things like that, we should be able to build tools to be able to better define how often is the PATH system used, where do people come from when they go to particular tennis facilities or the athletic clubs or things like that. We should be able to put those structures together. That should not be a difficult thing to do. Where is our membership? Where isn't it? That's probably an even better question. And the data will drive how we move forward. I think we're holding one hand behind our back by not having the appropriate data available. And the last thing I'll say is that the PATH system, I believe that the Columbia PATH system is amazing. It's extensive, but it is not the only extensive PATH system in the United States anymore. There are several communities that have very extensive PATH systems, and I think we ought to benchmark how we do things with other people, find out what their operating costs are on their PATH system. Do they do things differently? What can we find that would improve ours? What are we doing that could help them? There should be, if you look at Atlanta, they have a 75-mile PATH system around their city, and it is integrated into their communities, a little bit different than ours. I think it's pretty amazing. Bentonville, Arkansas is building more paths every year than anybody else in the United States. They are now the epicenter of bicycle paths. There are some lessons to be learned there. I think we ought to talk to those people as a short list. But that kind of initiative, benchmarking some of our infrastructure can only help us in making better decisions moving forward. So that's from a strategic plan I'm looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sky?
Yeah, I agree with many of the things that have already been mentioned. I would like to make a decision this year about how we handle donation requests and donations and the grant money. I believe there is a dearth of news, and part of that is marketing and public relations and the fact that we do not have any media centered here in Columbia because we're smack dab in the middle of two very, very large and important metropolitan areas. When maybe most people who know Columbia, when they think of Columbia, they think of open space. And next they think about the street names. But I think open space is the number one priority in people's minds. And when I think of open space, I think more of trees than I do of grass. Along with trees, it's great to plant a row of trees, but if you plant them all at the same time, they will all mature at the same time and be susceptible to the same diseases at the same time. So why not plant every other tree space this year, and 5 years later plant the in-between tree spaces? the fact that we don't have a newspaper, but we do have marketing, we do have the internet, we have banners at the facilities that advertise programs. But there's a difference between push and pull, and people are really, really busy, and they're not going to go to Facebook to see what's happening. They want the information to come to them. And part of that is the newspaper and the radio, which we don't have. But the most important thing in, I think, my mind is engagement and membership. And I think we need to perhaps do a better job of bringing the Columbia Association to the villages. We have a lot of events at Lakefront and Merriweather, but perhaps we could have a weekend event at one of the village center parking lots, and we would get a different clientele coming to that event. So I'm very interested in communicating with all the villages and finding out how they tackle this issue and why they chose that particular solution. Did they try another one and it didn't work? So that if the villages could get together and exchange ideas and solutions, I think it would save a lot of them from reinventing the wheel. But the most important thing is thinking about how we can bring CA out to the hinterlands.
Alan? Alan?
Yeah, I just, Bill's comment and then a couple other people followed up around street names. Do we know how the streets are being named in the Merriweather District? Is that just Howard Hughes' decision? Is there a process? Did the Columbia methodology follow through there, or is that a thing of the past that just happened in a few places and not anymore?
Eric, question, is this in line with what you're expecting for a conversation?
I wasn't really expecting to get down to the details of street names.
I could give a short answer. If
you can give a 10-second answer.
Pretty 12, maybe. Just really quick, in the Merriweather District, the street names were derived from acts that played at Merriweather. That's where you get Mango Tree. That's where you get Divided Sky. Divided Sky is from a Fish song. In the Lakefront North, it is from the first Black Maryland poet laureate from her works, which is kind of where I started with this and said, why don't we expand it out to the rest of the city? So that gives you kind of a toehold there. That was probably 22 seconds, but thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
So I'd like to just sort of summarize what I've heard. And these are in no particular order because I just wrote them down. And the main thing, some of the main themes I've heard are, I think almost everybody's touched on this, was infrastructure. The facilities, the paths, the pools, the tot lots. Do we have a plan for upkeep? What's our plan for upkeeping them? What's our plan for growing them? What's our plan for what are these going to look like next year and 5 years out? So infrastructure, I think, is a key priority in this budget, and also when we begin talking about the strategic plan in the future. The second theme I heard was the concept of accessibility. How do we get more people to participate, whether it's through our programming, whether it's being able to come to our pools or gyms, whether they're having problems interacting with our tech. How do we communicate with the people in our villages? How do we communicate with the stakeholders? Certainly, the concept of a newspaper came up. In fact, River Hill's got a great newsletter that's helped me and was really great when I first moved here to read what was going on in the village. But can we expand on that idea? And lastly, with accessibility, you can't have accessibility without staffing. So staffing is a key part of being able to access the facilities. Third priority that I've heard was the concept of affordability. So there's, and this is sort of the flip side of accessibility. So we can have accessibility, but we also need to have affordability. It's a common theme now that people are talking about HOCO by design. What's the affordability, not just in Howard County, but what's the affordability in CA? Certainly, we have some fairly high lien payments, certainly higher in lien payments in, say, Reston. We also have some significant, there's some significant costs with using pools and gyms. How do they compare with other HOAs? And can we lower the cost? Can we make living here more affordable? Can we make using our facilities more affordable? The fourth priority I heard was the environment. And certainly one of the recurring themes with the environment was the watershed management plan. So what can we do to see that out? What's our progress with the plan? Where have we gotten? What do we need to do with the watershed plan going forward? And the last priority I heard was the concept of grants. Who do we give grants to? How much should we be giving grants out? Or what is our position on CA as a grant-giving organization? So those are basically the 5 different priorities I heard. If anybody has any disagreements or additions, subtractions. Seeing none. Dennis, was that sort of a list you're looking for?
I think it was Susan, right?
Or Susan?
Yes, but I'm not sure that was consistent with what was given. So I'll summarize that and share it with everybody next time, right?
Just a small tweak on that with respect to the newspapers and all the other things. I think from a staff strategic standpoint is what would it take to stand up and provide staff to work on that project, the hours associated with doing that, the time to produce materials so that it could be disseminated to the board, to the community, to rent the space, to allow people to understand the interaction, all the budgetary numbers associated with putting those kind of initiatives out into the public and making them work and grow. That's probably the bottom line concern there.
Is that related to news?
Well,
it related to accessibility, communications.
Like I said, it was 2 to 4 initiatives, I think, that we'll probably have to take on in the next year. One of them, I think that's important would be, why don't we have a newspaper? But we may also have an initiative related to the environment, an initiative related to diversity in street names. There may be 2 to 4 of these that have to be done, and what would it take to actually staff those, support them, and carry them through? That's the budgetary question I think we're trying to ask at this point. That's my hope. I enjoy the discussion, but I think that's where we want to get an end point. I hope that's clear.
Keith?
The one piece that I actually realized probably missing, and I didn't write it down, but I was thinking about it. Karen mentioned something about her experience as a lifeguard, and it made me wonder. I don't know what types of development opportunities are available to CA employees in terms of deepening both technical skills, leadership skills, all of those components, and how significantly we invest there. But then I was expanding that and looking more at the youth who are part of these lifeguard programs and things, is formalizing, what that looks like in terms of overall investment in people and leadership development and skill development. So I don't know what CA has at this point, but I think a focus on people is probably internally is a priority.
And I apologize, I basically sort of put that under accessibility, but I think you're right that might be its own priority. So number 6 could be staffing and personnel. Reg.
Thank you. Susan, you had mentioned that kind of what you wanted to hear, but it wasn't exactly. Can you kind of give me a clue what you were trying to?
No, I didn't mean that. I just wanted to make sure that the summary reflected what everyone said, so that's all. Okay. So I think there's a lot of, what I gather from this is there's a lot of communication to be done for things that have been done or are have been documented, and we did a significant effort a couple of years ago on one of the things that Alan, you mentioned about what are the required expenses and what's remaining to be spent after that. That was a significant lift. So that actually was shared with the board when, Eric, you asked your questions about what was done related to the strategic plan. So some of that information's out there. I think what we'll do is, we'll go through this, summarize it, and then maybe do a chart of what you can expect to see that already exists versus what might need to be created. And then it will have to be prioritized, because I can assure you we would not have the staff or the dollars to do all of this in 2025.
So we were, so basically what we were saying is answering what you were kind of looking for. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I don't know if this will make Susan's job easier or more difficult, but I think, to reiterate what Keith said is that, I think where the board should be coming from is we want the pools to be affordable and accessible. Do you have a plan to do that? And then how do we track to that plan? I think that's really what we would like to see. So hopefully, Susan, out of this discussion, you have some... I think we've given you, sometimes we've dropped down to the more tactical level, so it might not be as easy to summarize things. But for instance, I think Bill's request for a newspaper. Is the high level, and Keith, maybe you can help me here, what is the strategic level of that? Is it a well-informed residents who are well-informed about what? What would, if CA is going to support some sort of a newspaper, if that's the conclusion for what that plan is, is that helpful to you, Susan, or not? Is that do we give you too many weedy things when we really should be giving you high-level strategic?
So I think there's both in here. There's some strategic thought, and then there's some weedy thoughts, to use your phrase. And I think I just want to kind of frame expectations that this list, I'm going to say right now, is impossible to accomplish in 1 year, certainly. So we will be, sharing the list as you wrote it and try to summarize it in the buckets that the most things, but you're going to have to prioritize. There's no way that CA is resourced for this comprehensive of a list.
So if I can just follow up on what I was saying, I think, Susan, what you're saying is very fair. What I would like you guys to do is come back to the board and say, okay, Karen, the board said you wanted the pools to be affordable and accessible. Here's our plan for this year. Here's our plan for this budget year. How long will it take us to get to? So if you can't do things in 1 year, I don't want it to be completely wiped off the plate, but I want you to say what is possible in this year.
Right. So I get that. Right. I understand that.
Okay, cool.
And just for clarification, I'm not looking for CA to start a newspaper. I specifically said that's not the point. The point would be to do the research and say most cities of 100,000 people have a newspaper. The newspaper industry is in this situation. Here are some models for starting a newspaper, and these are the people we should talk to about making that happen. It is a study. It is a rollout to inform the public as to how to get a newspaper, not to actually start a newspaper.
Keith? I was just going to say, when I heard the conversation about newspaper, and I think, Sky, you had mentioned some things about getting out or reaching out, those to me felt pretty deep in terms of where we were going. And I think the higher level piece is communication, because I don't necessarily agree that the way that we may be talking about reaching all of the populations is the way that we need to do it, but I don't know that that's our responsibility either. The responsibility for the board is to say we want to see communication improve in XYZ way, in a meaningful way, and then the team needs to go and figure out, okay, what are the metrics? How do we measure that? who are we going after? What populations? And all of those types of things. So, along with lines with what Karen was saying, is really trying to get ourselves up to that level and not going into the details or the weedy. Whoever said weedy, I like that. We can use that along the way. But
you're welcome, Keith.
What's that?
I said you're welcome.
Yeah, it's going to stick with me forever. But trying to stay high at that higher level so that we can just say that this is what's important to us, and then let's figure out how to fund it and make it happen. And then the last piece, when we talk about not being able to get all these pieces done, hopefully, in some of the pieces that I was listing out, what I was looking for when I say a plan is these things are multi-year plans. So just understanding, when we're talking about budget priorities and we get down, like last year, there was a lot of nitty-gritty, weedy type discussions. And what I didn't understand as part of those conversations are we doing what we said we are supposed to do as part of a multi-year plan? And if we're behind on those plans, then I don't see that we should be doing anything other than trying to get ourselves in line with the plans that have been outlined. So that's just, from a strategic standpoint, that's the priority I would expect, is that maintaining infrastructure, all of those pieces that Eric sort of summarized is priority over pretty much anything else. And then I'd love to fund other things, but I want to make sure that we're taking care of business in-house.
I just wanted to, Dan's here and is responsible for so much of the organization that drives the budget, and Lynn Schwartz is here as the Director of Finance, and I just wanted to offer to them, an opportunity to speak into this to further clarify. Anything you want to add?
I mean, the only thing, because obviously there was a lot of conversations about the pools, and a lot of these things, and I think it's kind of been said, and I think Keith probably, I think, had one of the best reactions was asking for information, because, there are some things where there's some assumptions being made that might not be accurate. So I think we want to make sure if we're identifying a problem, do we understand it and what is the goal? So we know what we're working against. Several people, affordability and accessibility for the pools, what does that mean? Every pool in the area costs more than we do. And this year's usage exceeded pre-COVID. So what does affordability and accessibility mean? And what are our goals if that's where we're at? What are our goals? And so how can we go back and work against that, and just how do we keep, how do we get more affordable and more, what is that? So I don't want to keep repeating it, but understanding the problems and really kind of providing some guidance and direction around that, or understanding, is there really a problem that we're trying to solve?
So I'd like to address that, and I think the key question is, who do we compare ourselves to? Are we comparing ourselves to things like Lifetime Fitness, which is a big national high-end gym? Are we comparing ourselves to other types of, like the Y? Or are we comparing ourselves to similar types of HOAs like Reston or Montgomery Village or the Woodlands? So as CA, who are our peer organizations that we're comparing ourselves to?
So you have to really, when you're looking at that and you're benchmarking your organizations when it comes from a price perspective, it's your community. You have to, because every community has a different cost of living, a different value. And so, just saying this to that, so we compare ourselves to everything within our greater community, because there is a certain cost of doing business here that is not reflective in other communities. So you can benchmark in other communities, again, and everything's relative. That's why we look at the whole landscape of what's out there and how do we fit in there. Rather than pick some random thing at a state somewhere else and say, how do we compare? Price-wise, that's not entirely relevant.
I wouldn't say Reston is a random thing. It is in Virginia, but it is similar in the fact that they've got 22,000 units. They're an HOA. They've got paths. They've got pools. They've got tennis courts. So there's a lot of organizational similarities as they are an HOA, whereas something like Lifetime is a corporation that runs a gym. So the question I have is, who should we when we're benchmarking and comparing ourselves, what organization should we be comparing ourselves to? Certainly, and that's sort of an open question for the board, because that sort of tells us, like, okay, what are we aiming for? Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. just, I think what I'm hearing Dan say, and I agree with, is if we simply say, let's benchmark ourselves to Woodlands or Reston, and that prices us out of a market here, it does no good to say, oh, we're equivalent to Reston or better than Reston. So I agree that it's what are the choices that our people here have. In terms of the part of the organization that Dan is responsible for, I think there's the part that I'm really concerned about is how much, that I think the board ought to be concerned about, is how much do we expect the entire community, and in what areas do we expect the entire community to fund things in what I still call sports and fitness. I know that's not what it's called anymore, but we have two things that have the word community in it, and I forget what they're called. But that's really, if again, what I call sports and fitness ran whatever you all did and paid for yourself, then almost the board doesn't even have to really think about it too much. But it's really how much of everybody's money do we think we want to invest in various areas for community benefit in the sports and fitness area. The other thing I just want to say is, and I'm surprised, and I don't mean this as a criticism, Susan, I'm just surprised you haven't said it yet, is that none of what we've said so far is a decision of the board. The board hasn't asked for anything. So the wish list, or whatever we want to call it, of all the things we talked about that, Susan, you said we couldn't fund, none of that the board has said we want to do yet. This is all just topics for us to start to have some discussions on so that we can give staff some guidance.
Yes.
And obviously that's going to get winnowed down.
So
I did understand that. I just was concerned that there wasn't any sort of expectation framing, and I wanted to just make that.
And I guess I'd like to try to get us back on track as far as what are you looking for from the board tonight? So basically, what I've been trying to get us to work towards is to get a list of priorities down. I'm not sure tonight's going to be the best time to try to prioritize those priorities, but if we can get a list down, that's a start. Is that sort of in line with your where you see us going tonight?
Yes, my thought was, and Dennis, you had wanted to make a comment as well, so looking for your guidance, but my expectation was that you would have this conversation, we would distill down the list, or, take notes and come up with a list of things that you discussed, and then that would be your starting point next meeting.
Yeah, I think Dennis did have his hand up.
Oh, Dennis?
I was going to say, I think the board sets the strategic direction, and I understand that we can't do it all at once, but we need to make incremental improvements. And if we don't start, we'll never get there to where we want to be in the end. And so if the board sets the priority that they want to lower rates, then we need to do that incrementally and figure out where that will take us. It may not take us to free in July, but it'll take us somewhere that we're not today.
Essentially what we're looking at is a whole bunch of scales. You basically say, okay, we've got pool rates or general facility rates. And you got a slider. This is where the rate is today. If it's a priority to make that more affordable, can we push in this direction? Similarly, if we have a watershed management plan, this is where we're here today. And if it's a priority to execute that or execute that faster, then you want to sort of push the investment to the right there. So the way I see it is, I think we've got 5 general priorities. Again, one is certainly our infrastructure, our facilities, make sure we're maintaining those, make sure we've got a plan for how we're going to maintain those going through in the future. Second is sort of making sure that things like pools and other amenities are accessible and affordable for our residents. Third, I did hear about where we are in the tot lot plan and how we're planning on executing that. Fourth, where we are in the watershed management plan and where's our investment in that. And the fifth thing I heard were grants and how much we want to dedicate to grants in the next year. So those are sort of 5 priorities.
Eric?
Yeah.
Did you include in there, like, I think both Keith and I mentioned it, and you may have mentioned it, increasing resident membership? Somewhere has to fit in one of those categories somewhere.
So
I think there's an opportunity though for Susan to take everything that she's heard and
yeah, I
put it in,
think, yeah. And I think that's part of accessibility, affordability of pools and facilities.
Gotcha.
So.
Yeah, I think Susan probably knows exactly what.
So the question I have for Susan is, does this give staff sufficient guidance based on our discussion today?
For a list for next meeting, yes.
A list for us to vote on next meeting. And then if we vote on that, then we'll need to prioritize that. So we'll need to come up with a strategy for, okay, we got these priorities. Now how do we prioritize the priorities?
With respect to accessibility and affordability, I think we need to include cost in that analysis also, because if we're not looking at cost, there's zero accountability for what we're doing. If we're just trying to make it affordable and we're losing money, that's not going to fly. It's not going to work. That's not how budgets work. So we need to say accessibility, affordability related to cost.
Well, yeah, there's obviously, I'm obviously going to make trade-offs.
But I don't think that was obvious. I think we should be explicit about that.
And I would assume that would come back.
Yeah,
I feel like that's something that the staff would tell us.
I guess the other question that is sort of implicit but hasn't actually been mentioned directly is, yeah, all this stuff can cost money, potentially cost money. So the thing that's in the back of everybody's head is, has...
Point of order. Sky was speaking.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I guess Karen and I started at the same time. I think the second of the 5, you were talking about pools, accessibility, and affordability, and I would like us to focus on more than just the pools. Membership, accessibility, and affordability, other events, other buildings, other venues. It's not just the pools.
Yeah, I want to second that.
Engagement and all that, increasing membership.
And when I was talking about accessibility, I want to also say pools and facilities and amenities. So I want to sort of make that broader, as you're saying.
Okay.
So yeah, it's got to be a broader, at a more strategic level. But you're right. Cost is important, and when we talk about cost, cost is basically affects annual charge. So when we add up all the numbers, the question is, okay, if we're adding all this cost, what is the impact of the annual charge to pay for all this? So that's got to be something that's in the background, a significant trade-off when we look at all this.
Karen's ahead.
Karen?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So I would like to know also, as we're going through these priorities, because what Sky said was really important, I think, is what is the utilization of everything that we're doing? Who is utilizing it? We have a very multi-generational community. So I know that there are seniors who don't go to Lakefront Live. So, but we're losing them. We're losing the membership of seniors in the gyms because they say it's not affordable. And I know that the seniors love to go to the gym during the day. If they can afford it, they love going to the gym. That's a clear opportunity for us. And I don't want to get weedy, but I think what Sky said is important when we're talking about all our facilities. Are they from pools to gyms to everything that CA is doing? Is it affordable? Is it accessible for everyone who lives here? Because while I love all the stuff at Lakefront Live, I feel like it might just be a small community of people that's actually taking advantage of that. So I'd like to make sure that we're grabbing a broader community, and maybe that gets into what we talked about earlier. But Sky, thank you for picking that idea. I appreciate it.
I'm having a senior moment. And I think rather than focusing on what our members use and the utilization percent of the maximum capabilities. I'd like us to also focus on those who are not members, who do not use the facilities, and why not?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Bill?
Just want to broaden it out a little bit. I think we need to recognize where we are broadly in this economy, and that the cost of everything is going up, and we understand that. And the cost of us doing business is also going up. And to say that we are just going to reset the affordability of everything because we think that's a good idea without looking at our realities is going to make this impossible to do. Disney is raising the prices of their entertainment packages. We don't do entertainment, we do experiences, and they're far more expensive than entertainment. And I think we should hold the line the best we can on increases. I challenge this group to say, where do you think the affordability will come from? What is the economy that we're going to find out there when everything costs more than it did yesterday?
Keith? Yeah, and then Alan had his hand up, I think, also. But when I was mentioning technology and all the various pieces in technology, what a lot of this seems to drive towards is a data-driven approach, whether, I don't know if we collect the information or not, but making sure that we have the resources available to understand all of those components and be able to slice and dice. So I think that's the conversation that we're needing to get to, is just understanding, what do we have? If we don't have it, what investments do we need to make sure that we can gather and make decisions based upon that?
Data is the new infrastructure.
So, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's exactly what I'd want to say. It's why I asked about sort of what's the pot that we're looking at that we would have, because it's really a matter of how do we want to invest residents' money, and what do we think will give the best benefit for Columbians and CA. And so if we wanted to make, just to use as an example, I'm not proposing it, if we wanted to make all the pools free for a month or for the whole year, we'd have to find the funds to do that from somewhere else. We'd have to make the hard decision, what are we going to stop doing in order to make that happen? But those are all things we can do. That's why we need to have these strategic discussions to decide what are our priorities, not what projects do we want, but what are our priorities and how are we going to make those happen?
So, no, I agree. And so we listed like 5, I will call spending priorities. But the question is, how do we pay for those? And so on the flip side, you sort of have the other side of the ledger. How does that impact things like liquidity, annual charge, cost? So the question is, where does that money come from? Does it come from finding cost savings elsewhere in the organization? Does it come from our liquidity? And we've got based on our last report, we've got a fairly good balance in liquidity. Does some of this come from our liquidity? What's an acceptable level of liquidity that we need to have? What's our target liquidity for the organization? And that's something we need to discuss. And then all that and everything, again, sort of comes right back to the annual charge. Because, yeah, if we spend money on everything, well, at some point you're going to have to raise the annual charge. Likewise, if you can find cost savings all over the place, and we've got so much liquidity that we can reduce the annual charge, you could do that too. So again, these all balance each other. So if you do something in one vector, it's going to affect another vector. So the key thing is for us as a board and us as an organization to understand what those balances are so we can make those decisions to how to best balance things. So with that, are there any final remarks before we go into the next agenda item? Seeing none, thanks. So it's 10 of 9. There are 2 more items on the agenda, the 5-year strategic plan discussion and improving board operations. Do people want to take a 5-minute break, or should we just plow ahead?
I'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
That's just me. Get somebody else to jump on board.
I think everyone's taking their breaks as they need them.
So there you go.
So you just want to plow ahead?
I think so. I mean, if you need to go to the restroom or something, then I think we kind of charge on.
Okay.
We're big boys and girls. If we need to go, we can go.
Okay.
Talk slowly while I'm out of the room.
Okay, so next we'll go to the 5-year strategic plan discussion, item 4C. Dennis, do you want to introduce Griff?
I was going to introduce Ormsby, who will introduce Griff.
Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Can you speak a little louder?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. So at the last engagement that the strategic planning group came in front of the board back in July, there was a takeaway and an ask that we go back and come up with a proposed framework that we can put in front of the board to guide the development of the next 5-year strategic plan. So Griff and the team has done this work, and Griff is here today to present what that looks like. The board should have received a report, multi-page report around that, and we're going to talk through it and get some feedback around that. Griff?
Thank you, Ormsby, and thank you to the board for letting me join by Zoom. The process that you have from your pre-reads really follows the assessment from the 2019 strategic plan and the recommendations that were in that assessment. So we have a brief sort of overview to go on. What I'd like to do, unless you'd prefer to go another direction, is I'll give you some of the just philosophy and background on that, and then you can ask questions. So,
Griff, would you speak up just a little bit louder?
Go ahead.
Here's your mic volume.
I can't hear you.
Could you raise your microphone volume or audio volume?
I sure can. How's that?
A little higher, please.
That is my max. Is that okay?
That's good. Yeah. Just speaking to the mic.
Okay, I will do that. Sorry about that. So the recommendation here, this is a process that results in really key strategy decisions that are based on, as we had talked, comprehensive stakeholder input and adequate data gathering on trends that are related to critical activities that CA does, along with some really sound logical conclusions through board and staff dialogue. And as I mentioned before, these are based on the assessment from the CA 2019 strategic plan. Can you advance, Ormsby, please? So the goals that I took away from that, and in developing this outline in this framework, we're developing a concise plan with a clear set of priorities, responsibilities, and metrics. Obviously, engaging the stakeholders throughout the Columbia area and engaging the board and the senior staff in some thoughtful dialogue around those issues, the goals, and the priorities. Can you go ahead and advance? Yep. This is the basic framework for that. And what I realized in putting this together is there are about as many opinions as to what a strategic plan process should be as there are people who conduct them or even study them. My belief is that each process needs to be tailored to the organization and have 4 essential elements, which really you see here, starting with the base of that pyramid, which is assessing the organization, the field in which it operates, and gathering information from the people that you serve and the stakeholders around that. Secondly, exploring potential service areas for adding or increasing value to constituents and stakeholders. Third, making those thoughtful decisions about what strategies to pursue, and equally important, what strategies not to pursue. And then lastly, and arguably in many ways, to my way of thinking, the most important part, and that's devising a thorough implementation plan that is going to be looked at, I know, from the board standpoint in just keeping updated and monitoring, obviously from the staff input, just a regular cadence of keeping the strategic initiatives advancing on that. Can you advance, Ormsby, please?
Griff, before you move, could you help me distinguish between the top 2? I'm not understanding what doing and playing, what the difference is.
I would think of the top part really is how you are operating, how you are working together. The actions are coordinated in in what CA will do. What are the action steps? To me, those are the mechanics. The top one to me is the interaction, the personal interactions. What are the behaviors? What are the skills? What do you need to learn in order to make sure the implementation occurs and the strategy occurs as you need? I find often that that's missing, but largely in many ways, to my way of thinking, devising strategy is also about the behaviors that are needed throughout the organization, and that's where that comes in.
Great, thanks. So sort of a process content divide. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alan. I mentioned that my piece about implementation, and I think the critical feedback part of that is very important. I think all of you know this, and I certainly want to recognize it, that no plan succeeds first contact with its constituents, with its audience, with whatever it is. And therefore, regular progress reporting, and sometimes surprises happen, sometimes critical feedback happens. To me, the strategy process really begins once the plan has begun to get implemented, and you regularly assess that. And I think that's something that could improve any process, and I think it's a really important piece that you consider as you go forward. When there's reasons to, basically reroute or recreate, it's perfectly natural. But it's important, I think, to look forward 5 years. It's unreasonable to think that all our predictions and assumptions about what will happen will actually come true. There will be surprises. The point is to be able to navigate change as needed and proceed on and plan accordingly, along with the action steps, the metrics, and what will be needed on that. So I think the last slide, really, you can advance any further questions on the framework that we have here. And I recognize it's a framework. In that sense, it's a draft. It has to fit. This is what are the core elements of what certainly I see. Alan, go ahead.
Griff, maybe it's really what you just said, but there are those who would say that what's needed is not strategic planning, but strategic thinking, because the world's changing too fast to think you've got a plan. How do you incorporate that? What's your advice to us in terms of, should we be seeing this as a plan, or should we learn how to think strategically and build that process into our work all along, or both, or what's
yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because I don't see them as separate. I think strategic thinking and strategic planning can be similar. The way I think about strategic planning is it requires strategic thinking. Many of us think we're good at that, and I think we all have a lot to go a lot of times when we think that way. It's really a matter of being able to, and you all know this, you're very good at it. But I think the idea of looking at the real strategy questions and boiling it down to what the critical decisions might need to be and what information we might need to make those. That to me is the ongoing process. And I believe that it's important to have a plan. I think smaller organizations can get away with having a more strategic thinking and being opportunistic. A larger organization covering the footprint that you cover, I think really has the potential to benefit from a plan, and that gets you thinking strategically. And what that means is you're constantly assessing what's going on. You're constantly aware of what's going on. What are the questions that we need to consider? What needs to be, what had we planned? Every plan has assumptions. If assumptions change, that's where your critical or your strategic thinking comes into play. So I kind of think, I honestly see them as dovetailing with each other.
Thanks.
Any further questions? So I do have two questions. One of my concerns with the previous strategic plan is it didn't have a lot of visibility, didn't have a lot of awareness. And if this plan doesn't have a lot of awareness, I question how much impact it can possibly have. So what are we going to do this cycle to ensure that this plan has visibility and results in impact?
So to me, that's part of your implementation.
Can I answer? Can I answer that maybe, Griff? Because I don't know that that's a question for you. I think
okay. I'm sorry, Keith. Go ahead.
We've done things already. For instance, at the VOC, we talked about putting specific elements of strategic plan reporting baked into the agenda, so that we're seeing this stuff on a quarterly basis, and reporting is going to happen on a frequent basis. And I think the board holding ourselves accountable to ensuring that we have access to that information is really where it starts. And as we evolve, we're going to want to understand it, data-driven approach. We're going to want to take a look a little bit deeper in terms of progress. And I think that's really our responsibility versus, Griff is going to work through this process with us, is going to discuss some things, and then I think hand it off to us, right, in terms of how we need to manage ourselves. So sorry to interrupt you, Griff, but I felt like that was kind of a board responsibility question. How are we going to execute?
Well, that's a board responsibility, but the board could have help along the way.
Sure.
So I certainly having someone that helps us along the strategic throughout the course of implementing the strategic plan, I think is helpful.
Yeah.
So again, I think my question is, how do we as a board, how do we as an organization ensure that the strategic plan is visible and is impactful?
Yeah.
So
we include it in our newspaper. I'm sorry.
So Griff, if you've got any ideas, I'd be interested in hearing them.
I do, and I really appreciate what Keith said. I think you're right on the money, Keith. I think one of the things I would add to that is it becomes visible by what you do and where you point to. So cascading it through the organization so that volunteers, for everybody knows, okay, these are let's say the strategic priorities, and this is what we're doing in this quarter about that, or whatever the time period is. And having that alignment and that focus, that singular focus, like this, we've got these 5, let's say, strategic priorities, and this is where we are in each one of those. And in this quarter, these are going to advance, these following priorities are going to advance to the following metrics or whatever the measurements might be. It takes a lot to cascade that throughout an organization. So I think there's a PR element that can be helpful. I think the other part of that that's becomes impactful is when every layer down through the organization has a clarity around what's being worked on and why that's being worked on. Not just that it's in the strategic plan, but it's in the strategic plan because it's designed to achieve a certain outcome or a certain result. And my experience, and I bet you this is probably similar to many of yours, is it's great at the top level where the strategic plan is often crafted. It becomes harder each element throughout the organization where you try to layer it, because you've got messaging, you've got to be consistent, you've got metrics, you've got to be consistent. So I think those are one of the things that we really need to do to make sure that that impact, Eric, is what you're talking about. In the last strategic plan, there were areas, even though it was largely an operational plan, there were areas that the department where they had the responsibility lay had the metrics. They knew where they were advancing. They helped craft that. But I think for all of the strategic priorities, that's where the implementation plan comes in, and that's where cascading it throughout the organization really becomes the impact.
So one thing you brought up in the last agenda item was the concept of plans. You mentioned the concept of a watershed management plan, a tot lot plan, a facilities maintenance plan. So the question I have is, how do we trace from a strategic plan to sort of what I would call subsidiary plans, such as a watershed management plan, and how do we sort of build that, do that within the concept of strategic planning?
I've got some of the plans that I was talking about are more operational plans. The reason why I was wanting to understand them is to understand, number one, is there a plan that we need to take a look at? What does it generally look like on a high level? And then are we fully funding it? In the sense that, are we moving in the right direction or not? And I believe that that's kind of the level that we want to stay there. But I don't know that they all roll up into a strategic plan necessarily would be my perspective, because those plans are really just how the business gets run and how things get done. I think that there's...
at some point, a watershed management plan would flow to a environmental strategy.
Sure, absolutely.
A tot lot plan would flow into a quality of life or...
I mean, you can draw a line to pretty much anything, right?
Yeah,
so everything we do draws a line to something that we're...
And granted, we're sort of reverse engineering this.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, from a strategic planning perspective, how do we engineer top-down, create the strategy, and how does that basically inform us? What types of strategic plans do we need? What kind of operational plans do we need to execute that strategy?
Karen's got her hand up too.
Karen?
Yeah, I want to tag onto what Keith was saying, is that, okay, so is our vision statement still satisfactory? Do we have a vision for what Columbia Association is and where we want it to be 5 years from now? What is it that we actually want? And I think that's where everything kind of falls into the strategic plan is, we want a majority of residents taking advantage of things. I don't know, maybe I'm still tactical, but we want to make sure that we have some sort of a vision for what we're driving towards, right? So, and then if I say, I'm not there in the room, so I can't read the vision statement on the wall, but what are the things in our strategic plan that help us realize our vision? Like, how do we translate what's on that wall into what's into the plan and then into the strategic plan? And then that strategic plan then becomes things like the watershed management plan, making pools affordable and accessible. And then you start measuring that. And I think that kind of waterfalls down. So, yeah, maybe I'm off track there.
So I'll just read the board. The vision states that CA creates and supports solutions to meet the evolving needs of a dynamic and inclusive community. But that actually falls from the mission statement. So the mission statement says, engage our diverse community, cultivate a unique sense of place, and enhance quality of life. So one question is, do those need to be updated? Sky.
I think a couple of key phrases are one that you used, Eric, which was reverse engineering. And also, Reg and I have the same work history and background, and I believe that you have a strategic plan. If you break it down and break it down and break it down far enough, then you get the tactical operational plans. Everything I did in my work history, every report I wrote, every report I signed off on, satisfied a requirement from the community, which means something different than we mean here, and would often satisfy more than one requirement. And I think it's just a skill of being able to go from top down and from down up, and to match the daily operations to enough of each level up to the strategic plan. So I think you can think of them as a continuum rather than discrete levels, strategic versus tactical.
Bill?
I think when we're talking strategy, we really need to talk about dealing with the functionality here. I mean, we're getting tied up with some of our master planning processes, and our strategic plan really should say how to identify when a master plan process is appropriate for the watershed master plan or the open space master plan or the aquatics master plan or the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Those are all vehicles to engage the public on a very broad level, to solicit feedback, to engage experts in the field, and to come to a solution for a set of priorities moving forward centered around one particular subject. So we should have a strategic plan that allows us to identify when it's appropriate to engage in the master planning process. And then that strategic plan should also monitor and evaluate those master plans as to when they need to be updated, changed, or redone, so that they are living documents and continue to serve the purpose that they have. All of our master plans are 10 years old, and we probably need to update them just because it's 10 years. But we really, as a strategic initiative, should be putting in criteria as to how, when, and why we should be doing those types of activities. That's what we should be looking at this top level, I believe.
You know, I think the key thing is having a strategic plan, but making sure that we can successfully connect it to the operational plans. Because if the strategic plan is completely separate from the operational plans, then the strategic plan isn't doing anything. It's got no impact.
I think I was trying to say that.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Yay. Sorry, it's getting late. Thank you, Eric.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So, and I'm agreeing with Sky also. It's like, how do we sort of build that system engineering approach from the strategic plan, building a strategic plan as, okay, this is what we want to do at the 100,000 foot level, to, okay, this, based on the strategic plan, these are the different operational plans we need to identify. Some might be in existence, some might be new things that come up as a result of the strategic plan. So coming up with this process of develop a strategic plan and then figuring out how it impacts operational plans and so forth down the line, I think is critical. So Griff, I'm not sure if you got any last words of advice for us on this, on how to proceed forward.
I could simply say yes, all of the above. Okay. But I think you all are on the right path. It does need to be aligned and cascade, and I think you all agree with that, into operations. But it also looks above and beyond operations to basically that where do we enhance or add value, and that's the key. Those are the key strategy decisions to me at the high level.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on this agenda item? Seeing none, that takes us to 4D, improving board operations and governance.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Griff.
Thanks, Griff.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks. There are 4 sections under here. The first one is the addressing the board strategic and oversight committees. So Susan, are you going to present that, or?
I was.
Or Armsby? I'm not sure who's presenting this topic.
I thought it was a.
I think it's really the board's topic.
Yeah.
What?
It's the board's discussion.
It's really the board's topic.
Yeah, no, I realize it, but it actually stems from a memo.
Andy has
It stems from a memo that's actually is impacted July 7th to Dennis from a whole bunch of staff.
Andy has his hand up.
Andy?
Yeah, I was going to say that, for this topic, the question before the board is whether or not it wishes to continue with a board strategic and a board oversight committee. So staff has given its recommendation that there are some costs associated. And what the board has to, I think, discuss is whether whether the value of those committees are worth the cost that we would incur to do those committees. I think part of the discussion has to be too, should we really look at all of our committees, and determine whether or not these 2 particular committees are needed or not, and then, especially making sure, as we've been committing, to make sure that we do follow all the HOA, requirements and things like that. And I just think the board has to really sit down and decide, do you really want these committees right now, or do you want to say, no, we will we will take this issue up later on different committees. I guess if we go ahead right now, there is a cost, and the board's got to be aware of that, and the board has to agree to that cost.
So the cost in the memo is per meeting. This is per meeting, 28 to 60 hours of staff time per actual meeting. So if there are two committees meeting at the same time, you double that to, I guess, 60 to 120 hours. So I guess the first question to Armsby is, what is the impact of that?
So I think fundamentally it comes down to a resource issue that we currently don't have staged with NCA. So I think there would be consideration needed to as to how we would spin that up, right? Either through contractual work or, FTEs, adding FTEs within the organization. But I really think it comes down to a resource and a capacity issue that is just not present to enable that, to have these additional meetings.
Alan?
Yeah, I guess I have to say I have some questions about some of the assumptions in the memo in terms of why so much staff time would be needed for a particular committee, given that we can put things on Zoom or whatever and record them and have them available to the public and meet some of those requirements that way. But I'd also say that I'm not convinced that those two committees are really what we need. We've got, so I think we haven't really given a good look at what committees we do need to have to really implement our work moving forward.
Andy, did you have something further?
I'm sorry, Eric, what did you say?
Did you have something further? Oh, I saw your hand up. Did you have something further?
No, I took it down.
Okay, sorry. Any other questions? Sky.
I have a real quick question and then something that I found to be missing. Maybe I overlooked it, but my question is, was this two-committee system a result of a motion made last January or February that passed? And my comment that I think might be worth missing is this study did an incredible amount of work to arrive at the cost in resources and in finances. But perhaps what's missing is these two committees would take the place of a work session. And what would be the disadvantages to not having a work session? Thank you.
So this was voted on at a previous meeting last year.
Was it to take the place of? I never really understood that because
is to create. I don't think it was actually voted on whether it would
take away.
It would take the place or not. I don't think we got to that level. I don't. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's what I thought. That's. I don't think we actually made that decision, Reg.
Okay, I'm sorry, but maybe I misunderstood. You said that this was voted on last year?
Yes.
So the board previous to this one?
Yes.
So some of us weren't on that board. So okay, so that's part of the issue with CA and elections and boards and stuff. But so it may have been voted on last year, but those of us that were not here before are kind of behind the eight ball, don't really know that, don't understand what's actually going on. So it'd be helpful to explain.
So basically the idea was last year the board basically said we've got two major initiatives. One is CEO selection and the other is strategic planning. And the idea was, would it be easier if the board basically had two committees, one that focused just on one of the issues and one that focused on the other issues, and would that make things more efficient? And would that make things run more smoothly as a board, but also as an organization? Obviously, this memo was dated July 7th, so when we voted on it, we did not actually have this information in front of us. Basically, voting is basically more sort of a conceptual idea, but we didn't necessarily have the pragmatics in front of us. Keith?
So the I'm pretty passionate about this one because I
can tell.
I'm beside myself in a sense. So the whole premise of these committees is a quick start. That's what the board said, is that we're establishing these committees so that we would roll into the next fiscal year with the new board, and we would immediately start filling these committees and doing the work that the committees outlined. Clearly, that has not happened, and even if we establish and fill these committees, it's not about staff time. It's really about what the board said we were going to do, and that was quick start. We are months beyond that at this point, and by the time we get it spun up, we get charters established, all of those pieces. We're going to be into like November, December, realistically, before we get these things nailed down. So to me, and I know I can't do it right now, but I'm already at the point where I'm ready to put a motion just to retract what we spoke about, because the whole premise of doing these committees has already passed us by, where there's no efficiency to be gained at this point. And it's really not a staff issue. It's it's more of a board thing. Alan?
I think Armsby had his hand up before I did, so I don't know if you still wanted to say something.
I was just going to add clarity.
Working great, Armsby.
I was just going to add clarity to the comment around the work session. So we went into this analysis with the assumption that the work session will remain a separate standing meeting. So it would be an additional meeting.
So that dovetails with my comment. But first of all, I want to say, Keith, just because you're beside yourself doesn't mean you get 2 votes.
I'll take Lynn's vote for now. She asked me to step in.
My understanding was that this would replace, this is how I was holding it, that these committees would replace the work session and would feed their results into the monthly meeting. So the cost savings of that clearly weren't figured into staff's report, because that wasn't the staff's assumption.
Well, I think in some ways it.
Could I also just say that I absolutely agree with everything Keith said, that we did not do what we said we wanted to do. In fact, we talked about that. We said, let's make these committees so that the next board is ready to go and just moves in on them. And I just think it was not something that worked out.
Armsby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you could use this analysis either way, whether it replaced the work session or not. If it replaced the work session, you got 2 meetings, so it's 28 to 60 hours. If it's in addition, you got 2 meetings plus the work session, so you double it. So I think
that's correct. So the level of effort can be applied to any multiple of meetings for sure.
Andy?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think the difficulty, this shows the difficulty of actually the board creating a committee, that we really have to give serious thoughts to the committee. How, do we want to replace the work session? Do we not want to replace the work session? What in essence are going to be the scope? When is it going to? All these questions probably all should have been discussed before we actually went ahead and created the committees. It's just I'm finding that given our structure, given the rules we operate under, it's not easy for the board to just quickly establish a committee. There's structures, there's rules, there's things that have to be followed. Things we didn't know when we actually discussed this and approved it at last board meeting. And I just think it behooves us to kind of take a step back and maybe think about the next time, do we really want to create a committee, and what is it actually going to cost? What's the committee going to do? And I got to admit, I'll go along with Keith, and I think we should just move on.
Before this discussion continues, is there anyone here that wants to see these committees continue or occur? So seeing none, it just seemed reasonable that on the next agenda we could just put a vote to disband both committees. Is that reasonable?
Eric, first, yes, I agree with that. We're agreeing a lot. This is cool. But I want to say that given the flavor that was surrounding this, I actually voted against this motion last year to create these committees, with all due respect, Keith. But I do recognize that we need to have a structure to be able to create a committee to address specific topics that is at least partially populated by board members that would have a finite duration and then have deliverables to the full board so we could actually get some things done. You know, if we want to go far, we walk together. If we want to go fast, we walk in smaller groups, right? So there is a need for that, and I completely recognize that, and we need to probably develop that structure before we go about putting together entire committees, and also getting the feedback from staff as far as how to do that in a cost-efficient way. So I just wanted to put a button on that.
Okay. Any? Sky?
I just want to respond to that because I think it actually, though, goes further. I think what I hear you talking about, Bill, is sort of ad hoc committees that have a particular purpose. But I think the original focus of this was a look at, is our current way of operating having basically a work session, which is sort of like a committee of the whole to talk about things that then feeds decision into the voting meeting. Is that the best way for us to do our business? Or do we want to go, in a sense, back to a version of what we've done in the past, which is to have board subcommittees so that board members could focus on particular things and have more focused discussions and then bring the results of that back to the meeting? And that's a question that the board needs to resolve. Then if we decide we want that, then get into the question of how that would work and the mechanics of that. But there's still a board strategic question.
So yeah,
do we want to operate in a committee structure?
So this doesn't really touch upon ad hoc committees at all for a very specific topic.
Right.
Again, I don't see any strong support to keeping these committees. So does anybody have any support for keeping these committees?
I have a question for Keith. What was the alternative to establishing these two committees? What was Plan B or whatever?
Plan B is doing what we're doing now.
If you all hadn't voted on these two committees.
Plan B is what we're doing now is work session, meeting. We all attend the work sessions, we all attend the meetings, and everything comes before the entire board. So both the strategic planning gets done at the board level in work sessions, sort of everything gets done in the work session meeting structure. So it's what we did last year, what we're doing now.
Just to add on to
I think it would be worth a short history lesson, though, for those who are new to the board.
Keith?
10 years ago, and I don't know what happened before that, we had three sort of standing board committees besides things like the audit committee and that sort of thing, that 3 members of the board were on each. Those committees met once a month. But what we found at that point was that for various reasons, including trust among the members of the board, everybody started attending every committee meeting. And so people were having to go to like 4 meetings, the regular meeting and 3 committee meetings. People didn't like that. So we ended up, in a bizarre decision, deciding to hold all 3 committee meetings in what's now our work session time, and the meetings would be done in front of each other, but they still only had 3 members of the committee who were voting members of the committee, but anybody on the board could talk about the issue while the committee was meeting. And then we decided that was stupid, so let's just have a committee of the whole work session type thing. So we've experimented with different structures. The question is, for me, is what do we want? What are the pros and cons? How do we want to govern ourselves? What's the best structure for this to happen? Then how do we make that happen?
So, Keith?
The only other thing I was going to add to that is that I'm in favor of spinning up ad hoc committees to do specific functions. And really the only reason I voted for this, and I did, is because I understood that the board governance components were going to be included in one of these committees. So now that we're addressing board governance as part of the ongoing agenda, there's two things now that have really fallen off for me. Number one, the immediacy of it, and number two, the board governance component. So I would prefer to go with ad hoc committees than to move. And
So given that we seem to be in fairly good agreement on this, I think we've got to.
I'm sorry. The last thing, Sky asked me a question, so I responded to that. The last thing I wanted to say, though, is I want to make sure that we understand whatever we're voting on next in a couple of weeks, that we also understand like an ad hoc committee to spin up the pieces that we're going to need, similar to the review process that just happened for the president piece. I think that worked really well, where a group of people got together for a specific purpose. And I think it's appropriate to make sure that some of the items that were supposed to be in there get spun up in ad hoc committees.
So if you have an idea for a set of ad hoc committees, just please send them out.
Sure.
But I don't think we'll be voting on specific ad hoc committees next week. I think basically the key thing is making a decision on whether or not we want to keep these two committees that were established last term, and whether or not we should just disband them so that the staff is not dedicating more resources to this. But I think we're in
Consent agenda item?
It seems reasonable for the consent agenda. If there's no disagreement, Andy.
Those would have been ad hoc committees rather than standing committees.
Which ones?
The two committees, the strategic.
These were passed as standing committees. They were passed last year as standing committees.
Standing committees have no end. Ad hoc committees do have.
I realize that, but these were established as standing committees.
Okay.
They were standing committees with an initial task.
Yes.
That each one had.
Yes.
But the thought was that these are the two areas that we needed to focus on with ongoing board committees.
So I think we've got something for the consent agenda. I will go on to 4D Part 2, the Director Handbook. Andy, do you have any discussion?
Well, before we move on, there's a piece of that doesn't quite sit right with me, because I think that just has us get further behind on the question of how do we want to govern ourselves. So so sounds like we've got pretty good agreement, unless people change their minds, that these two committees aren't the way to go. That says nothing about what is the way to go. And so I'm not saying we should spend another hour talking about it tonight, but if all we do is say, let's put on the consent agenda and move on, we haven't really moved the ball.
I think we need to put that concept on the board topics log. So we need to add a board topic for basically how does the board want to govern itself in the future, and then get that on a future agenda, probably under the governance section. So I don't think we've got the time to do that this month, but I think it's something that we definitely want to think about.
We have to end before we can begin.
So now I'm going to go on to the CA Director Handbook. Andy, do you want to present the handbook for CA directors?
Just very quickly. Over the last couple of years, I've realized that it would be nice to have a document to give to new board members on how we do things and things like that. And the idea behind this was the first cut at a handbook, and if the board approves, then we simply turn it over to staff, and every time the board updates how it does things, staff can kind of tweak the document, and we hand this out to every board member that comes on, so that something we can refer to. That was, I think, the gist of why I created the handbook. Oh, by the way, Alan, your topic is actually on a future agenda, so we will talk about it.
Cool. So it's already on the board topics log and on an agenda. That's great. we're one step ahead of everyone. If it's okay, I would also like to combine this with the CA Director position description. I think both the handbook and the position description are related. So I'd like to combine the discussion of both 4D2 and 4D3 into a single discussion. So is there any discussion on the handbook or the position description? Reg?
Eric, just let me say real quick, the position description came about because people have asked, well, what does the CA director do? And we realized we didn't have an actual position description, and so the thought was we could come up with something, and then when anybody asks, we could say, yeah, here's a very brief overview.
And it makes sense that the position description would be the first page of the handbook, potentially.
Okay.
So I think it'd be...
Can I speak now?
Yes, Reg.
All right. So actually, there's a portion here that I really like that it's here. And it says that the CA board does not manage, and I'll say that again, the CA board does not manage or provide day-to-day operations of the CA. And also it says the CA board should view its role as being at the 50,000-foot level and not at the 1,000-foot level. So don't go in the weeds, basically what it's saying, and it says here as well. So I thought that was good to have said that because we all need to hear it and understand that, we don't go to open space or to the gyms and start telling them how to run their operations day to day. But ours is to give a strategic level plan, and that's what we're supposed to do, not in the weeds.
I think Sky was.
You go first.
Keith.
So I don't know how deep we wanted to go, but there's a couple of things, like there's a board advisory committee section that establishes certain requirements for board members, and
What page?
I don't have
pages.
Sorry. Let's see here. It is on
Page 7 of 22.
Okay, thanks.
just really clarifying, the requirements of board members to sit on advisory committees. Twofold. We establish advisory committees to do work and then to report back to the board. So the idea of having an additional requirement for a CA board member to have to sit on an advisory committee is a little bit troublesome for me, in the sense that when you consider that there are 2 CA board meetings, potentially a closed meeting if there's something contractual going on, 1 or 2 village board meetings, and then an additional advisory board meeting, I think we quickly start to select out the people that are going to be attracted to working in these in these roles. So I think we want to be really careful about memorializing that in.
What sentence are you referring to?
I have it in my notes. I apologize. I should have done a better job with that. There was something in here that said that we were board advisory committee and was going to attend at least 1 meeting each fiscal year.
I think that was the
I'm not seeing
memo
it.
of April 5th.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it in here.
So it's not in there. It's in the actual memo associated. Okay, I'll find it. I'll find it and let you all know. It doesn't have to be.
Eric? It's this memo.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks.
It's, excuse me, it's the last statement on the job description.
What page is that?
I don't have the packet.
Oh,
There was then the topic 4D3,
Oh,
it's the
okay.
very last bullet point.
Yeah, so the question,
Right.
Oh, yes.
So it says, it says serve as the board liaison to ACA advisory committee. So the question is, do we want to remove that from the director position as a requirement? And make it less of a requirement, say, may serve. Could you just put the word may in front of that?
I mean, I'd be comfortable with that.
People with their hands up.
But
I thought you were done.
Yeah, I don't think we see any other hands.
I think Alan has his hand up.
I've had my hand.
Yeah.
I've had my hand up.
Alan?
Small thing, just let me say it before, it doesn't have to do what we were just talking about. From just a formatting point of view, I'd like the table of contents not to say Appendix A, B, C, D, but instead to say what the topic of each appendix is.
Yeah, that should be right.
Overall, I have a concern that what does a handbook mean? Is a handbook the same as policy? Is the handbook just guidance? Who are we to say, if, for example, a village sends us a board member, and the board member, to use the example that was just given, doesn't want to be part of a advisory committee, and we keep that in, are we in a position to say, well, that's a requirement of being on the board, you can't be on the board? Do we have that ability to do? I don't think so. So I think we need to really gauge ourselves in terms of how are we seeing this in terms of the, if you will, enforceability, or is it more about sort of the sum of Andy's good experience and guidance over the millennia that the years that he's been serving on the board?
So I see this as informational. This isn't policy. If it were policy, this would require a 3-meeting rule. So I see this as mostly informational. I don't think this is enforceable. I don't think you can go and say, okay, you didn't carry out step 3 in the handbook here. I think it's, because that would require policy.
Just, if you want to wordsmith it, call it a guidebook instead of a handbook, and then it'll be completely, understandable what's going on. That's my suggestion.
That makes sense.
Secondly, I think that the requirement of attending one additional meeting is not an onerous demand on folks' lives. If it was one additional meeting a month or one a quarter, the case could be made, and I think that's a strong case. But one a year is not. I think most would jump at the chance to talk to folks who are excited about a particular segment of our work.
Yeah, but Bill, you attend every meeting that there is in all of Howard County.
Keith.
So just to finish up that piece of it is, I would believe that, I know it says a minimum of, but if I'm required to sit on an advisory committee, I would be thinking that I would want to be a part of that advisory committee on an ongoing basis, so that I'd have an understanding, not just once a year, but over time, what that would look like. So part of that is framing it for me. I'm making an assumption, if you require me to sit on the advisory committee, then that means that I'm going to have to engage with the advisory committee in a deeper level, not just once a year, even though that's the requirement. The other piece that I wanted to, there's a lot of detail in this handbook or guidelines, whatever we're going to end up calling it. And I would recommend, and I kind of came up with like a format, but more of a quick start, because a lot of these documents get put together and no one's going to read this at least right away. They may use it as a reference. What's that? Give me the look.
Let's read it right away. It's the handbook.
So just experience at other organizations. I don't know that people have really gone through and read, handbook, especially a 50-something page and you consider all the appendices and things. So I'd love to see a quick start. So these are the things that need to happen at the beginning of your time, just very much bullet pointed and moving in and making sure that we have things like position papers. So when we get into, some of the big issues that we were discussing that crossed over from one board to another, is making sure that there's a position paper so that everyone understands and can get read up really, really pretty quickly on, what's happening, what the major issues are, what the background is that you need to gain from those elements. And then, moving through first actions, and I have a list of them that I can distribute, but also the, helping people to understand what is the actual commitment, because it seems, it sort of, it just evolves really pretty quickly in terms of what your commitments are here. You get on and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you have to do that. And I didn't realize that was part of it, and so on and so forth. And then just who to contact to make sure that we understand who are the key people, what are the methodologies for how to submit information. And then everything else could be in the handbook / guideline, but I see it more as a reference document versus a quick start.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful to have those type of where to go, a one-page outline of where to go. One thing I've heard that on here is take the last bullet and just call it may serve as a board liaison to a CA advisory committee and strike the rest of it. Andy?
I just wanted to answer Alan's questions. This was meant for guidance. This was not. There shouldn't be. I'll say policy. You must do this. You must do that. This is more for guidance, so that when new people come in, they at least can use it as a reference. How do I do this? How do I do that? So yeah, it was meant as guidance. And I do like Bill's idea of calling it like a guidebook or guidelines for CA directors, because it's really for guidance.
Sky?
Yes. Okay. I have a lot of markups on this document. The first thing is I wasn't quite, I couldn't quite figure out why certain topics were in a certain order. Part of it seems to be alphabetical and part of it just seems to be wishy-washy. But it's short enough that I think it's okay.
One question, how many markups do you have?
Oh, I'm not going to go through all of them.
That's what I was wondering.
No. But on the advisory committee, this is a quote, to advise and guide the board of directors on specific topics related to CA in Columbia. This person is a liaison, a conduit for information between the board and the committees. So it's my view that a liaison is not an active member of the committee, but can answer questions that the committee can push those questions to the board and push answers back to the committee. And I think attending one committee a year just broadens our knowledge base. I've attended 2 different committees, and one, I attended it instead of Chris because he was unable to make it, and it just opened up a world to me. And I think we need to talk about the role of the board liaison a little bit more.
Sky, could you send your markups to Andy so he can integrate them into the document?
Sure.
Thanks.
Can I speak to the... So on the advisory committee, I wholly agree. The difference, I think, philosophically on where you may be speaking about and where I am is that I don't believe that one time a year I can get spun up on everything that's been happening on the committee, right? So I'm not looking to say that the liaison would be actively involved in decision-making and so on and so forth on the committee, but more that you have to know what's going on in order to be able to liaise, right? And then the other piece about the advisory committees is I really believe that there's a responsibility to have the committees reporting more to the board so that we can get a sense, not necessarily that a board member has to translate everything that's happening at the committee to the board, but that there should be...
So before we go down this, we'll call it rabbit hole, right now the topic of discussion is the guidebook. There is a future topic to discuss the role of advisory committees on a future agenda. So I'd like to have discussion about advisory committees and our role with the advisory committees focus out on the future agenda.
So would we strike this then for when we vote on the guidebook?
Which one?
Anything that talks about advisory committees.
So this is meant to be a living document.
Sure.
So this should be written in such a way that it's generic enough that it would generally apply. Reg?
Okay. So I think what this is to me is if I were a brand new, newly elected person coming onto the CA board and I really didn't have a great idea of what I was going to be doing, how I was going to be doing, this would be my tool to figure out how I'm supposed to do that.
Yes.
Which way I'm supposed to go. So, and as far as the advisory committees, I think those are good things. I don't think we should, you don't have to, the wording should be, it's not mandatory, but if you have the time, if you can, it's a good thing to attend and see what's out there. And I've tried to do that on, I've got two and I've attended two so far, or one of them I've attended several. And then the other, let me finish. But the other one is on golf, and it's great getting out there and just getting a chance to meet everybody that's involved. But this is a way for those of us that are new, brand new. Of course, I'm not new; I've been on them before. But for brand new person, newly elected, can figure out and see what they're going to be doing, and I think they're going to welcome the opportunity to see and read what's in here. Gives them a guide.
Karen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the board for the advisory committees for future discussions, I think that the board passed some things either in February or March. Janet looked it up for me. She sent me an email. I have it embedded in an email somewhere and I haven't looked at it. But I think when it comes to how the committees are run, we have stuff on that. So I'll find Janet's email and I'll share it with everyone. So Keith, I think we are going to address some of that stuff about goals and things like that. So I didn't want to continue down the rabbit hole, but I just wanted to say I think we have stuff for making sure the committees run well.
So here's my recommendation. If you have edits to the handbook, please send them to Andy so we can integrate them into a final document. And then we can vote on that final document at the last meeting. I would like to take the description of duties and add that to the first page of the guidebook. So it's all one package.
Just one last comment to aid in driving people to read this document. I would like to suggest that once this gets approved and it gets put on the Google Drive, the file name should be where the bodies are buried.pdf. And I think most people will look at that first. So.
Thanks. So Andy, if you could take if everybody can send their red lines to Andy, get them in, we can get them integrated. Anything referring to advisory committees, keep in mind we're going to be discussing that as a board on a later agenda item. So that area should be generic enough to be able to handle any changes. And we might need to change the guidebook anyway to reflect board decisions. So is that fair, Andy?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, cool. Next item on the agenda.
I just want to say I think that it's just because any of us, myself or anybody, suggests something to Andy, first of all, we might suggest conflicting things to him. So I'm not exactly sure that just simply saying, Andy, put all these red lines in, or Andy may disagree with some of them.
So
it's not clear that that's necessarily the best way to go about this.
If there's any conflicts, we could vote on in the meeting. So I would not put this on the consent agenda, just in case there are any conflicts between red lines. Just, Andy, when you get the suggestions, just note if there's any major conflicts that we would have to vote on as a board. Okay, last topic, residents.
And please give us a document that shows us what you changed.
Yes. So you use whatever, what is it called? Track changes. So thanks. Last topic, resident speak out policy. So we've had a whole bunch of suggestions for what we want to do with the resident speak out policy. So the question I leave to the board is, right now our current policy, our residents have 3 minutes. Anyone representing an organization has 5. One of the problems was in the past, if you have a lot of people coming here, resident speak out has taken in the past an hour and a half or so. If there's a lot of people showing up, tonight it was pretty quick. So the question that's before the board is, do we want to make any changes to the current policy? So with that, is anyone proposing any changes to the current policy?
Karen's hands up.
Karen.
I don't think we should make any changes to the current policy. I personally believe that the only time resident speak out takes a long time is when we have a hot topic. And then, once the hot topic is resolved, we go back to normal. And I would rather hear more from residents, not less. So I don't want to make any changes to how we currently do things.
Sky.
I've been collecting comments from people about resident speak out for the past almost 2 years, and I've appended a whole page of them. I think we need to control the residents' speak out more than has been done in the past. One way is, as the Howard County Council does, everybody gets 3 minutes, no matter whether they represent an organization or not. There are holes in our policy. One is that anybody can say they represent an organization and they immediately get 5 minutes. And this has happened when my village residents have spoken. They have spoken saying they represent the village and do not have the village board's permission. Another time a person said he represented the village. The village board said, okay, as long as you give us your content and get the content approved, which did not happen, and the person still went and spoke for the board. So I would, and since I appended this page, I received 3 more comments from the residents, and they're all real picky details, but some of them are important. There is something in either the Maryland HOA Act or the Open Meetings Act that says we must provide a forum for residents during our meeting. It doesn't say that it could go on ad infinitum. It does not say that the comments have to be oral. They can be written. I would like to encourage more written comments. I have a feeling that when we have an hour and a half, that we kind of get tuned off to the oral aspect. I think if we get them in writing, some of us would tend to read them and maybe read them again and a third time, while as if they're orally, we really, how many of us go back and listen to so-and-so's comment from 2 meetings ago? So I have comments on the last page, including more. I think it's important to have residents speak out. I think we can limit it. I think Andy said something about one working session to have them pertain only anything, and then the voting session to have them pertain to the agenda items on that we're going to be voting on. Another thing is those who speak out during the work sessions, there's no written record of who spoke out or what they spoke about. There is a written record in the meeting minutes for those who speak out in a voting session. But that's one thing that people would like to have memorialized, that they said, they spoke on a certain topic during a work session.
So, Sky, you've given the board in the packet 11 different things. I don't think we want to desperately have 11 different votes on this at the next meeting. So the question I have, is there a particular set of things that you would want to see come to a vote next meeting? If you were to make a motion, what would it be?
Well, we've got my 11 plus 3 more, plus 7 or 8 that Andy added.
So we need, I guess my point is we need to whittle this down from dozens of ideas. And I realize it's late, but in order to actually have an effective vote on this next meeting, if we're planning on voting on this next meeting, which is what's on the agenda, we would have to, I think it's on the agenda, we would have to whittle this down from 20 ideas to something that we could concretely vote on. Alan? Actually, is it on the... Alan? You're on mute.
Eric, sorry about that. This is just an opinion of mine, but I think you're starting to fall back into a habit where you felt like you had to respond to everybody's comments. So I just want to note that.
Noted.
I want to say that I'm fine with enforcing the rules we've got. I'm fine with encouraging people to write things. But I agree completely with Karen that we shouldn't be restricting this just because we could require people to do written doesn't mean we have to. this is the time when residents can comment. And if we have a particularly thorny subject, that's when we ought to get more resident input. And if it means we run late, if it means we have to suck it up, then we have to suck it up. And that's what we ought to be doing. So I'm not in favor of making any changes to what we've got. But I would say that to respond to what you just said, Eric, we could have the decision in 2 weeks be yes, no, do we want to make changes in resident speak out? And then decide later what those are, and sort of have the group of people or in some way create what those would be. I don't think we need to believe that we're going to push to a vote on the specific changes to resident speak out in 2 weeks.
Reg?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I do support what Karen and Alan had suggested or says that they'd like to do. I'd like to keep it the way it is as well. I really believe that this is something that I've had an opportunity to speak to a number of residents, and there isn't a single resident who's come up to me and said, Reg, we got to put an end to resident speak out. If anything, they're concerned that they're not given enough time or not being heard by the board. So it tells me that they want resident speak out. I think if you want to make it, everybody gets 3.5 minutes, fine, including an organization. If that's what it takes, it's fine. But we need to have residents speak out. It's a fundamental, and I said it in my email to you guys, it's a fundamental right of every citizen. So I think that that's something that we should actually support.
Bill and Karen.
Okay, a few things. I don't think anybody's talking about eliminating resident speak out. We're talking about providing structure to resident speak out. I think that we could make resident speak out more expansive. We could give everyone 21 minutes, increase the amount of time by 7 times, but we would require them all to talk at the same time. And then we would never understand a damn thing anybody said. We need to have structure, okay? I think it's healthy to ask, if you're speaking for a group, to have a letter from that group saying you're authorized to speak. That provides clarity from the group to this body as to where this is coming from. It's a simple ask, and I don't think that's too much to ask. We are an HOA, and we are not a government. And if we look to the government folks, they require letters. You know, the county council, the planning board, the school board, the board of appeals, all require letters from organizations. They all require that if you're going to speak, it has to be on the topic that's on that agenda for the night. If you go to the county council, which has sovereign powers, which has police powers, which is an actual functioning government, you cannot go in there and speak to them about any topic you want. You have to talk about one of the bills that's being spoken about at that time, and only at one of their meetings, not at both of them, okay? We are far more expansive and far more amenable to the wishes and needs of this population, but we do need to have some basic structure. And I think having a letter from an organization is a key, and I think that at least at meetings, when we're doing our voting meetings, we should keep it to what's on the agenda, because we're there to do a job, to do votes. If we want to open it up to any topic, I'm free to have it at every work session and have that, like Sky said, have that recorded as part of the meeting in the minutes, who spoke at resident speak out. Allow them to speak on any topic at work sessions, but when we're having a meeting, stick to the agenda. These are simple things to make it more structured and to allow for meetings to progress in an orderly manner. I don't think it's a huge ask for those two things. So that's where I sit.
Karen?
Yeah, I just have a couple comments. So first of all, I did like some of Sky's recommendations, but if you bundle them all together in one thing for us to vote on, I'm gonna have to vote no, because I don't like some of them. So I really like the thing about the groups, like if you're testifying for a group, I really liked her suggestion as far as you should have some kind of, you should have something that says you're the authority who gets to speak for that group. However, to Bill's comment about they should only ever get to speak to things that are on our agendas, well, I know right now that on September 20th, I can go and testify for HOCO by design. That's the last chance that anybody has to do that. Months in advance, I know what bills they're going to be discussing. We only decided our agendas a couple weeks ago. And so I don't think residents have enough time to come to residents speak out when the agenda comes out 6 days in advance. I don't think that's enough time for them to plan. And I think they should be allowed to come and talk to us about anything. If they want to talk to us about, they think that the lines on the bottom of the pool aren't straight enough and that's not on our agenda, I think they should get to come and talk to us about that. And I don't think they should be limited to just coming to work sessions. I'm fine with some structure. But I do not want to limit them at all. I don't want to limit them in their topics. And I think that would make them furious. So,
Alan?
You're on mute.
Mute.
You're mute.
Sorry, I was using my phone before and my phone's not muted. So anyway, I think we're trying to fix something that isn't broken. You know, we had a huge issue with president and ethics and all that, and that's resolved, and that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about the usual thing. I mean, the other topic was the watershed, the Lake Elkhorn thing, but you know, just despite Sky's example of some apparently something that happened in her village where I guess was a member of the board spoke for the board without the board's authorization. I can't think of a time when we've had somebody coming to us, and we have, for example, people like Sharon Boyce who were challenged that, are you really speaking for an organization? But yes, absolutely she was. I don't see a lot of, I keep track because I've been the timekeeper, who gets 5, who gets 3. And I can't think of a time when somebody came and said, I want 5. And I said, whoa, that can't be right. You know, I can't say I'm perfect on that, but I just don't think that's an issue. And in terms of can they only speak to agenda topics on one meeting, then there is a limit. It's not just a limitation in what people can talk about at a particular meeting, but if we just spent time talking about our priorities are, we want to expand engagement. And there are people who, if I'm a person and I can't come to the designated meeting, but I could come to the other meeting, but I can't talk about my topic on that meeting, then I'm frozen out for at least another month. Why not give me 3 minutes, have my say on whatever the topic is? We can stand it. We're big people. In normal conditions, as we saw tonight, we get a couple of comments, and that's it. We already have structure to our resident speak out. We don't need more or different structure. We just need to enforce the structure that we have.
The only piece the whole 5 minutes versus 3 minutes, I'd prefer to just have it all be the same so that we don't have to get into this question of bringing letters and who you represent and so on and so forth. But I would like to see a limit, and I was actually thinking work session versus the voting session, but to the topics that people can bring to those sessions, because I get it that we had these big explosions of issues that are going on and we want to hear from residents, but when there's work that needs to be done, and we are listening to residents during that work session for an hour and a half or 2 hours, so then what ended up happening in our meetings is we never got to really to discuss the agenda items that we needed to discuss in order to move them forward. I think that it's reasonable to say that, and again, I was talking about a work session. I hadn't thought about this concept of the voting session, but at the work session, just saying, look, these are the topics that we want to discuss today, and that's where we want to keep our attention focused. So please limit your discussion to those topics so that we can move some things forward.
Bill?
I just want to say that for folks who are saying, well, we had an hour and a half of residents speak out and we're big people, I agree we are. But when we get to 11 o'clock and the alarms are going off, what typically happens is we have at the end of our agendas something like the quarterly report or, thank you, sorry, the quarterly report or some other item where we say, hey, could you just summarize that because it's late in the evening and really don't have a lot of time left to get these things done. And we have discounted a lot of topics that needed some discussion because we were here for an hour and a half listening to people, which, don't get me wrong, if that was what needed to be done for that night, we've got to figure out how to make that night work. But we need to have some structure here so that we can make sure that we can address the things that are on the agenda in an economical way, too. There needs to be a balance.
I think there's something on the webpage that says not everybody will get a chance to speak. It doesn't say it that way. It says we may have to limit the number of speakers, and we've never done that. We've gone for an hour and a half. So I think the webpage could be well, whatever we do, the webpage needs to be tightened up, or we need to follow what's on the webpage, or the webpage has to reflect the way we operate.
Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I just know that when we were having the issues with the CEO last year, the room was crowded, and I'll just ask Sky, if you had not been given an opportunity to speak during that, how would you have felt if you couldn't get your opinion across?
There were 21 meetings last year, and I actually spoke at 14 of them.
Great.
But my topic was fairly different each time,
Yeah, but
so
I just
did
think
feel
that
listened
so
to.
many people came out to speak on that topic. Can you imagine limiting any single one of those people?
Reg?
So, it's the residents who put us here. If they don't vote for us, we don't get in. Okay, we're not sitting here. And the residents won't have the ability to speak. So, if for anybody to get up, I'm not saying anybody does, but if any of us were to get upset because a resident said something that we didn't want to hear or thought that it was off topic. I mean, I've been in meetings, CA meetings, and even village board meetings when we're talking about subject A, and then the resident comes in and is talking about subject Z. Totally different. But the thing is, they feel they have the right to do that, and they're correct. And then once they've spoken, they kind of feel, okay, they feel better because they got it off their chest. They said what they had to say. We heard it, and then they can move on. But the thing is, to tell a resident or to limit, and we may not be saying that, but it kind of sounds like it to me. If you're going to limit what the residents are going to say, then they really have a lot. They have a lot to say to us when they see us, and it isn't always kind. So we need to give them the ability to be heard.
So I'm going to say this. I think it's ironic that 2 hours ago we discussed the need for improved communications with our residents and how that was a strategic topic, and now we're discussing ways to limit communications with our residents. I think resident speak out is an important way that we engage with our residents. I personally don't want to see it changed. And so the question I have, more of an administrative question, next meeting, is this slated as a vote or a discussion topic? Dennis or Susan, do you know offhand if this is scheduled as a vote or a discussion topic for next meeting? Randy?
I don't know.
I think it's a discussion topic.
It's a discussion topic.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend is we just take a vote on whether or not we need to change it in the first place at the next meeting. Would that be a reasonable approach?
Yes.
Keith?
Change what, the policy or the operation of it?
You need a policy change. Keith?
So in any of my comments, I absolutely, I respond to residents via email. I am happy to hear from folks. I'm happy to engage, and I think absolutely we need to do those elements. The piece that I struggle with that we always seem to gloss over is the residents are also demanding that this board get stuff done. Okay, so we spent a better part of a year not getting things done. That the work of the CA board, and that's of concern to me. And we've we've chosen actively not to address some of the challenges and situations that we encountered in terms of, healing from from our constituents. We've avoided some of those conversations, but the number one thing that I heard over and over and over again, yes, there were concerns about all these other issues, is why can the board not get anything done? So the only reason I ask to have some limitation in at least one of the meetings is so that we can spend all of our time during that meeting getting that work done that the people are also asking for. The other comment that I heard the other day, which was really interesting, is that there are people who won't show up to resident speak out because they don't want to get blackballed, blacklisted, however you want to describe some of those pieces. So there are people who have very strong opinions who don't show up here, and they may talk to their representatives outside of here. And there's a lot of those folks who are asking us to get the work done. And that's the lens that they are looking through when they're looking at the board. So I just want to be careful. I absolutely want to hear from residents. I absolutely want to engage with residents, but I also want to handle the other side of that is we need to get work done. And I'm not saying until 1 o'clock in the morning to try to get the agenda done when we've spent all this time listening to residents that want to speak out on that topic. At least one meeting a month would be beneficial for us to be able to get through the agenda. And I'm not talking about normal times, because Alan, I agree with you. It's not always going to happen, and there are times when we zip through it. I think the reason why we craft some of these rules is to look at extraordinary times, not the normal times.
Alan?
Yeah, Keith, I absolutely agree about that we need to get things done, but I think it's a misdiagnosis to say we didn't get things done because we were listening to residents. Residents were coming as 14 out of 21 meetings or whatever and speaking up because they didn't see us getting things done, and that was because of the way we were operating with each other. If we had operated with each other better, including issues that had to do with our dealings with our former CEO, we wouldn't have had the residents speak out. So to me, that's a symptom. It's a piece of data we should be paying attention to. This generated a lot of residents speak out, but to regulate residents speak out because of that is to regulate the wrong thing. And
Bill?
Just one last comment on I've heard several people talk about the residents want to be heard. I just want to mention that we as a board need to do a better job of listening. Oftentimes during residents speak out, I notice some of us, and I'm guilty of this too, staring at the desk in front of me, looking at my screen, not paying attention to the person who's here. When anybody is speaking to us, we should give them all the respect and attention they deserve. And I think that is part of the issue here, is that even when people come multiple times to provide residents speak out, they feel like they still haven't been listened to adequately.
Bill, and I know I'm going to break one of Alan's rules here, but I'm going to respond directly. I think you're making assumptions. If someone's looking at a notepad while someone's speaking, doesn't mean they're not listening. No. They could just be focusing.
What I'm saying is they don't feel that they're being listened to. That's what I'm saying.
Again, some people have different ways of listening. Some people have different ways of listening. Some people need to focus on something static to listen. People have very different ways of listening. Reg?
So I support that, because sometimes, I'll try to directly look at whoever I'm speaking to, or whoever's speaking, I try to make that eye contact. But a lot of times I'm looking down here because I'm actively thinking about what they've said. Or sometimes I'm just, I can't really hear what they're saying. So I tilt my ears towards, where they're, so I can hear their voice coming in. I think, my friend, you made an assumption that I don't think is actually, I think it's an assumption that I don't think is correct. I think when the person is speaking, they're actually concentrating on just getting the words out and trying to say what they want to say. They're not concerned with whether I'm looking down my computer or whether I'm looking over here or whatever. They're concerned with, am I doing this right? Am I saying what I want to say? Am I, whatever. But I hear what you're saying, though. I do hear what you're saying.
Alan?
I think the part I would agree with Bill is that I want to make people who are taking the time to come here feel listened to. So I think if we are engaging in behaviors that are having them not feel listened to, we need to at least find some way to let them know we're listening. I know for me, besides the fact that I'm looking at the time as timekeeper often, I'm always taking notes on my computer of what people are saying so that I can refer back to them later and keep track of the sort of tenor of the conversation and what we're hearing from residents. But I would also say that the best way, I think, one of the best ways to let people know we're listening is to ask them good questions, is to pay attention enough to what they're saying so that we can ask them a question that means something and avoid us speech making, but that would let them know we're listening.
So it's getting, Keith.
I just wanted to say, I know everyone's saying that these were assumptions. I just want to, before I got on the board and I was sitting in the audience, I was listening to people saying that look, this person's not at all paying attention to me, or this person isn't engaging. So it's not an assumption. These are things that I heard multiple times from different people. And, when I was contemplating running for being appointed to the board, I heard a number of these conversations and things being written about the fact that we're just not engaging. So I don't want to get into necessarily a back and forth, but I didn't want you to sit out on the side and say that, you're making assumptions. I heard from a number of people through my process that that's the way they felt about the board during resident speak out. So.
And I was one of them, and I mentioned it in one of my speak outs.
Anyway, I'll point out that it is 20 past 10, and we would sort of discuss a lot about this topic. I don't think we've really discussed much in the specifics. I don't think we have the time to get into the specifics tonight, but I think that from what it sounds like, there's certainly one segment of the board that feels that there should be changes to this policy. There's also another segment of the board that feels like that we shouldn't make any changes at all. So, Andy, with your concurrence, what I'd suggest doing for next week, or the next meeting, is taking a vote on whether or not we should change the policy.
Well, I have some data for you on that. Janet, you all don't see the chat, but Janet put in the chat, Janet Lofgren, that she's confirming that resident speak out is on for board discussion on the 28th, but the vote is not set until October.
Thanks. Thanks, that's helpful. But what we could do is, Andy, if this makes sense with you, is take a vote on whether or not we should change the resident speak up policy. And if that vote passes, then we could come up with a list of ideas that could be potential motions for the November meeting. Does that sound reasonable, Andy? Just so that we're...
Well, what I was thinking is what might be good. I mean, like I heard tonight, there seems to be, I'll say, some agreement that maybe limiting everybody to 3 minutes, okay, might be a change we might make. And so what I'm thinking is, why don't we come up with, say, a couple of proposals, and then we can take, we'll just say, an ad hoc. Do we really want to pursue this or not? Pursue this particular change or not? I mean, from what I've heard tonight, I can think of there's about 3 or 4 issues that the conversation has revolved around. So we could put up a proposal said, what do you think about we change to everybody having 3 minutes? Okay. Another proposal we could say is, what do you think about limiting topics to just work sessions? Or another one could be, what if you just limit to meetings? So we have like four or five of those, and then we just say yay or nay. And if we say yay to any of those, then you draft a little policy that says, here's how you implement it.
Yeah, the only problem I see with that approach is that right now I've got a list of 11 plus, there's probably others out there, so this list could get up to 20 pretty quickly. I'm not sure we want to do that for 20 different items.
I think we can whittle it down very quickly. I'll work with Sky.
So I was just...
That means having 2 people who are in favor of making changes to the policy work on the list.
Well, no, I mean, the list would go back to the board. I mean, Alan, you're not making any, you would like to keep the policy as it is, so there really aren't any policy changes coming from you, I assume.
I guess what I'm trying to get to is if there's not enough support to make a change, then we shouldn't be discussing all these changes because it would just become a waste of time.
Yeah, but that's what we could do. As I said, if we have 4 or 5 items, you can just say, all right, is there any, you do what we used to do. Sometimes we just do, ad hoc votes. I mean, do you want to pursue this anymore? Yes or no? Okay. Do you want to pursue this one? Yes or no?
So I guess, we could take an ad hoc vote right now. How many people are in favor of pursuing this question again for the next meeting and make a change? And how many people would be fine just abandoning this altogether and keep the policy the way it is? So if you're in favor of making a change to this policy, just raise your hand and see if there's enough support for it. So I've got 3 in the room. If you're online, I got 4 online. And so right now I see 4 people in favor of it. So if there's only 4 people in favor, that's not necessarily enough to actually make a change. So the question is, do we want to continue this?
But that's what you just asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you just asked.
So
if you only have 4 people in favor, then no.
I think it's important to discuss it and make the web page reflect what we do operationally. And the fact that Andy came up with 7 different suggested changes, Bill has come up with a few. I've collected them from residents and some of them I would vote against, but I collected them all over the past 2 years, and it's one of the things that, and perhaps you've noticed that most people who come to our meetings leave immediately after residents speak out.
So I think given it, and the reason why it seems to be a fairly close vote, and again, we don't take votes during, we don't take votes during work sessions, so it seems like we're somewhat split. So what I would recommend is on the meeting, we just take a formal vote on whether or not we want to change it. If that vote passes, then we can actually just discuss these ideas and figure out which ones should become motions for the November meeting. Does that sound like a reasonable plan, Andy?
Yeah, I guess we could do that.
Okay, sounds good.
I would like the policy sent to each of us so we know exactly what we're voting on.
Well, yeah, okay, we can.
I would just like to point out that it's already on the agenda as a discussion item, so it would take a change of the agenda.
Yeah, we could make a.
Implement what you're talking about.
Yeah, Andy, I and Dennis could agree to a change to move that up to votes. That sound reasonable, Dennis? To take a vote on whether or not to change the resident speak up policy. And you're on mute.
He nodded.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Okay.
I do have a couple of things I'd like to say quickly.
Okay.
One is in response to Sky. For me, the website gives us an out if we need it. By putting it on the website that we may need to limit it.
That's even worse.
Does it?
Well, this time we're going to go ahead and limit it. But
I hear you. I hear you. So maybe that's the reason not to. But to me, it's it is part of our current policy, and we don't generally do that, but it is part of our current policy. But the other thing I want to say to you, Keith, is the assumption that I was referring to. I can't speak for anybody else, but I heard it from others who talked about making an assumption was more about Bill's assumption about why people, the assumption that people on the board were not paying attention to residents, not that residents didn't experience being paid attention to. I don't think there's any disagreement that we at least can't have disagreement because residents told us, as Sky said, that they felt like we weren't paying attention. But that's different than making an assumption that board members were not paying
No,
attention.
that was my point, was that residents said that they didn't feel like they were being listened to.
Right, but you framed it, if I recall correctly, as an assertion that board members were not paying attention. They were looking at screens, they were doing other things, and that's different than we were doing things that had caused residents to believe we weren't paying attention.
Anyway, any further discussion on this? Seeing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Karen. Are there any objections? Meeting is adjourned at 10:30.
I think
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Eric.
adding words like anyway, because that dismisses